attendance is, simply put, huge. Student attendance. So student attendance is about it's a big deal. It's about 90%, matters in about 90% of your school funding. So when kids aren't in attendance, it does not positively affect funding. So I'm not willing to say it always negatively affects it, because it's not always true, but it doesn't positively affect it when they aren't in attendance. So we're going to talk about some stages. First thing we're going to talk about is daily student attendance and taking that. So we can see that I've kind of got 5 stages of attendance here, and we'll come back to this at each stage, and that eventually leads to school funding. So this first stage is taking attendance. And so what is attendance? Well, attendance for funding purposes is defined in IDAPA, that's board rule, and it's when the student is under the guidance and direction of a teacher in the teaching process when school is in session. That's attendance. Okay, and it can happen on site, in person, right? And it can also happen virtually. And it didn't sound like we have any virtual openers here, so I'll be mentioning virtual, but for all of you, that doesn't necessarily apply. So here's some suggestions on taking student attendance. Number one, the student information system you choose is critically important. How many of you already have a pretty good idea of the student information system that you're going to use? And where did you get your idea of which one you were going to use? Anyone?
Our sister schools all use Power School.
Okay, sister school use Power School.
All of the schools for Elevate use Infinite Campus.
Yeah, Infinite Campus.
So the Filer School District used Power School, and then when I was touring other charter schools, I would see what they were using, and we set up on Infinite Campus.
Yeah, Power School, because that's what you know, or who you talk to, other schools, and that's what we would recommend, that you speak with other charters or districts. But they're critical that you have people in place that within your buildings can make sure that that system is set up appropriately. Student information systems are great because they do a lot of the work as long as they're set up appropriately as far as us getting the attendance data that we need for funding. So back to taking attendance. So if you are an elementary, and elementary is defined as 1 through 6, but in terms of this, we'll talk about K through 6. For funding purposes, elementary is 1st through 6. K is its own separate entity. But we recommend taking attendance in the morning and the afternoon. That way you have the most accurate attendance. So if a kid missed maybe the first hour or two, if you only take attendance in the morning, then there may be a chance that you're not getting all the attendance you should get if attendance isn't taken again at some point during the day. So that's always the recommendation. At the secondary level, we recommend taking attendance each period because that's the way students typically, they go from class to class.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So do kindergartners not count?
No, they count.
Okay, how does that work? I've just been, parents are like, oh, it doesn't matter if they go as a kindergartner, we can.
No.
Like,
Yeah, no, kindergartners matter just like all the, for funding purposes, they matter just like all the other grades. In Idaho, just kind of jumping off since you asked, kindergartners aren't funded. A full day of kindergarten isn't funded. The legislature, it's always been that a half a day is funded. But they definitely, their kindergarten attendance matters. So So taking the attendance is critical, and getting the kids in school is critical for the school's funding. So for everybody's in person, so this is like in person, right? But if you were a virtual school, virtual schools have the option of using, because you don't have in person where it's not like, oh, Rob's here, the teacher checks it. Instead, virtual schools can use time on task, or kind of like a seat time if they want, is if their system can monitor it, or they can use percentage of coursework completed. That is provided in statute. And this statute citing is incorrect. Not that it necessarily matters to you, but for me, it changed this year because they reshuffled Chapter 52, which deals with charter schools funding. And now that citing should be 5207, Section 11, not 520810. That was what it was in 23-24. Anyway, and this last word that I have here, that the charter school should have a policy or procedures to specify the attendance tracking methodology. That is for virtual schools, okay? That use percentage of course completion. So for in-person, for all of you, this is the way that it works. It's set specifically by IDAPA. And basically, we call it the 2.5 4-hour rule. Okay, 2.5 hours of instruction, up to 4 hours, but not including 4 hours, counts as a 0.5, a half day. All student attendance is eventually converted into a 0 day, a half day, or a whole day value. Okay, a 0, a 0.5, or a 1. So greater than 4 hours of instruction is a whole day. Okay. Less than 2.5 hours of instruction is a 0. So if a student is there only for first and second period, and your periods are only an hour long, and then they leave and attendance is marked correctly, your system should be identifying that as a 0 attendance day. Okay. The reason for the absence doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's excused or unexcused. Okay. For funding purposes. This is all for funding purposes. Now, there is a provision, and I don't have it in here, that if you have students, and this occurs more and more frequently, if you have students that are coming to you that only come, their schedule is they only come an hour or two, then there's a provision in this IDAPA rule that allows their attendance for the week, instead of looking at just a day and using the 2.5 and 4 hour rule, we can look at the entire week, and we can aggregate the hours of instruction that they receive. So let's just say that you have a student that only comes for an hour, and that's just their schedule. For whatever reason, that's what you've agreed to. They only come for an hour of something. And you're a 5-day-a-week school. Any 4-day-a-weeks in here?
Well,
Okay.
we have the 4-day with the Friday invite day. So
Okay. So essentially a 4-day.
essentially a 4-day.
So let's just say that you are, for simplicity, a 4-day school. They're there all week, right? They're there for 4 hours. These part-time scheduled students that wouldn't normally get any attendance, and therefore you wouldn't get any funding because they don't come 2.5 hours or more, so they're a 0. Instead, we can total the hours, and then we can use the 2.5 and the 4-hour rule for the week to go, oh, well, they came for 4 hours that week. That equates to 1 day. So you get 1 day out of that week funding for those part-time students. So there is a method for these part-time students do any of you envision having part-day kids? Okay, so that you want to make sure that that it matters on calendars, that you have what's called a dual enrollment calendar, but you're probably familiar with that, right? Okay. Additionally, alternative schools, as you know, alternative schools report in hours because statute and rule allow for more flexibility. So just like I just described, alternative kids, their hours aggregate for the week. And then it's uses a standard for the week to determine the days. But again, eventually we get to days. Okay, so that's all kind of student attendance. And it gets in a little bit into sort of where we're heading about what a day is, but now the data upload, attendance data upload. Your student information system takes all the marks that the teacher makes on their when they record attendance, and it's built, Infinite Campus, Power School, whatever you choose to use, it's built to produce a report on attendance that you send to us, along with 11 other files that are part of the IC upload, which you send us. And so this schedule is my version of what it'll look like next year for the IC upload schedule. You have to send it to the State Board of Education, and then we use it in school finance. And so you send it in October, November, December, March, and May, and the end of the year. And if you have summer school, which potentially you eventually probably will have summer school at Elevate, you're going to send it sometime in July or August when summer school ends. There's a seventh submission that we care about. So this kind of gives you an idea. I'm not going to say that this is exact because Todd King with IC, that I think maybe Todd came, I don't know if he presented you with the schedule of this, but this is about what it should look like for next year, because based on the calendar next year, this is probably about what it is, but I'm not going to guarantee because I just kind of put it up there so you could have an idea of the windows to submit. Did you have a question, Joe?
No.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is this system also changing where it's going to be more interactive, where we wouldn't have to download all those things and things? That's what
I
you
don't
were
know the
explaining
ins and
yesterday.
outs. All we know is so that Todd would have to answer that, but I know there's a modernization attempt. I don't know how it's going because I haven't heard anything since the beginning of the year in August that was the plan. And I haven't gotten an update. So it's there. The IC, all of it is it's their system. They collect the data, and so it's supposed to be coming, but I don't know if it'll be live.
I think you mentioned that they're going to run two programs parallel to one another next year to kind of monitor. Is that what that's what I understood?
Okay. Yeah, probably have the old and hopefully a remade new that's a little more live and interactive. Yeah.
With the summer, is there additional funding to have kids in the summertime?
In summertime, yeah,
Okay.
but not for a regular student
For the
doing summer school. Basically, they pay for that. Parent pays for that.
Only alternatives.
Only alternative students that are, defined in code what alternative students are, that they're at risk and they meet these criteria. Those are the only students that the state will fund for summer school.
So a regular school can have an alternative summer school program? Okay.
But you can only serve qualifying students as defined in Idaho.
Yeah, alternatives type students, okay. Are we going to go over that definition?
I'll give you the code reference
Oh,
for it
okay, that'd be great.
when I go.
So stage 3, once we get the data, then we aggregate or put the data together into grade bands for funding purposes. Kindergarten, okay, elementary, which is 1st through 6th grade, which I've already mentioned, secondary, which is 7 through 12, and alternative students, which can be 6 through 12 that meet the at-risk criteria. So we also take the data and we look at the data for two specific periods. The midterm period is defined as the start of your regular school year, so it does not include summer school, the start of your regular school year to the first Friday in November. Okay, so this year, the first Friday in November was November the 1st, so it's always the first week in November. So that period of time is called the midterm or the fall period. And that period of time, the ADA, average daily attendance, which we'll get to, and the support units calculated from the ADA, they go and they are what we use to determine salary-based apportionment, which is approximately 70% of the funds that you'll receive in your foundational payments from the state are salary-based apportionment. So every day, every week during that fall midterm period is vital, okay, to a big chunk of your funding. The other period of time we call the best 28 weeks. Typically, your regular school year is 36 weeks long or so, give or take a week or two or three. And your best 28 is exactly that. We look at the whole year and we rank the best weeks of ADA. So it may be the 10th week of school was your number one week. And we do that, and the first week of school was your 27th week, best week of attendance. We rank all of those, and we only count the best 28 out of the 36. So there's 6 or 8 or 10 weeks that are dropped, depending on how many weeks of school you have. And the average daily attendance that comes from that and the support units are used to determine what's called discretionary funds, which are about 30%. And Julie will talk more about that when she presents. Okay. So let's talk about aggregating the attendance. So using a smallish elementary school, grades 1 through 6, we'll just say that each of the grades has 25 kids. Okay, that's 150 kids, grades 1 through 6. You submit a November submission that is their attendance for the midterm, right? Start of school through the first Friday in November. You submit this right over the window closes first week in December. Okay. The attendance for all of these kids, the first graders, you have 25. Oh, and I said it here. Okay. And your instructional days during that midterm period is 40 instructional days. So you have 40 days. The first graders, if every kid was there every day, that would be 1,000 days, right? 40 times 25. Okay. But because kids don't come to school every day, I've just made up some numbers, 960 for first graders, 950, so on and so forth. Those are the aggregate days, okay? Because remember, days are counted as 0, 0.5, or 1, okay? For a total of 5,730. Okay, so that's what I mean by aggregating attendance by grade band or grade. The days are added up, they're total. Okay. So next we're going to look at, well, how is average daily attendance calculated, ADA? So taking that same data, the only thing that's different is down here. Now I've put in the calculation of ADA for this elementary group, grades 1 through 6. We take the total days, the total aggregated attendance for the elementary group, and we divide it by 40. That'll tell us the average daily attendance. So those 150 kids during the midterm produced 143.25 ADA. Well, why didn't they produce 150 ADA? They weren't always there. So attendance matters. When kids aren't there, your ADA is not going to be 100% of your enrollment. Okay? Yes? 10 minutes left? Okay. So, support units. Once we know ADA, we can calculate support units. So, Idaho Code 331002 for years and years and years has had this same table. And this is basically a conversion table. All it does is it converts ADA to support units. So we're talking about the elementary group. We're talking about an ADA from 110 to 159.99. Remember, it was 143.25. We look across and we go, oh, well, that divisor should be 19. So it tells us we need to use a divisor of 19 to convert the ADA to support units. So we just simply take 143.25 and divide by 19, and we get 7.54 support units. Well, what's a support unit? The easy way to think about it, as Julie will mention again later, is a support unit is approximately meant to represent what it takes to operate a class. One support unit. Okay. So it probably wouldn't be unheard of for this particular school that only had 25 kids in each grade to have probably 6 classrooms. Plus, you probably need another classroom. You need a sped classroom, or probably. Anyway, so this kind of makes sense. About 7.5 classrooms or so. Okay. You may ask, well, what's the average daily, the state average for the value of a classroom or the value of a support unit, value of a classroom? The state average is about, this year, is about $146,000. And Julie, are you going to show them how we get to that? She'll show you later, if she has time, how we get to that. That means speed up. So, this is how we get to support units.
I have a question.
Yep.
So when you talked about salary-based appointment and discretionary funding, does that support unit value fund both of those, or is that just?
So if we're talking, so this support unit value, good question. This support unit value of 5.74, I give to Alex, because Alex does staffing and she does the salary-based apportionment calculation. And so the 7.54 then would directly apply to the salary-based apportionment calculation. The best 28 week very well could be slightly different than that. And I give that to Julie and she does the discretionary funding calculation.
And we'll talk about that more.
Yeah, okay.
I'll show you an example all the way through.
So just to clarify, the first calculation is the first submission. The second calculation for the best 28 weeks is for discretionary. That was what I just understood. Is that correct?
Yeah, the midterm period, which is the start of school, right? Is that period of time, the support units generated there is salary-based apportionment. When we look at the full year and take the best 28 weeks, that is the discretionary dollars.
But you'll submit data in October. You'll submit it in November and again in March and June, and you can update.
Yeah, you can
as
put
needed.
corrections. If you notice that our data that we submitted in November was incorrect for a couple students, we had their attendance wrong on these days. When you submit it again in March, you can update it.
We will
And
update
it-
all of our calculations.
And all the calculations for
When
student
you-
attendance.
When you get the last thing. it kind of-
With your one last go.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so for all of this, you'll all be producing a budget, and Ashley and Carol will be talking about budgets. So to help you determine how many support units, we have some resources that you should expect. So on our webpage that's here, that you have in your packet, we have the 24-25 budget forms and information. So you would look in there, but you're not 24-25. We won't have the 25-26 out until after the legislative session ends, because there may be changes to things. And then within there, you'd look in there, you'd scroll to the bottom of this that opens up, and you'd find the charter support unit calculation template. And it's a template that looks like this. And there are 5 different sheets. Only the enrollment input sheet, can you enter anything? Every other cell on the spreadsheet is protected. Every other sheet, every other cell, and you can only enter into the gold cells. But what you'd enter is, first, what do you expect your attendance rate to be? Okay, that's important. You know, if your attendance rate, you expect to be 97%, because very few of your kids really ever miss. And some charter schools have an attendance rate, you know, approaching 97, 98%, then you would put it in here. If you know your attendance rate is 91, and that's a good representation of your school and what you expect, you would put it in here. I don't know what it will be for you. You kind of have to determine that. But the tool allows you to put that in, because that really affects what the ADA produced will be. And there are formulas in these cells to help that. You also need to know what your expected fall enrollment will be at your different grade bands. Kindergarten, 1 through 3, 4 through 6. If you have secondary students, how many? Secondary, remember, is 7 through 12. Okay, so I've just put it in. I just put some numbers in. Once you do that, now Elevate, and you guys know how to use whatever this tool or whatever tools you use with alternative. So you would fill that in there. It's a little more complicated with alternative, but next I skip to the actual output, looking at the estimated midterm units that attendance rate and those enrollment levels would produce. And we get a side-by-side comparison of 2209, so 22.09 support units and 22.13. The good thing to know is you will always get the bigger of the two. So use the bigger of the two. Okay, and it says, don't use this one, use this one. Okay, so this tells you, well, you should budget for your midterm, you should budget 22.13 support units, and you would take that to your salary-based apportionment template, budget template that Alex has on the website. Okay, there's a lot of formulas behind all of this, and the basic reason why there's 2 different versions is because this one has exceptional students have a different divisor, but exceptional students aren't based on actual, it's based on an allocated amount of a percentage of your enrollment are identified and funded as exceptional. And this statute allows those certain percentage to be shifted out of the regular ADA produced down to the exceptional ADA. And then for a lot of schools, it's a more advantageous divisor, because the divisor is 14.5, which is smaller. Math, right? Divide by something that's smaller, you get a result that's bigger. Support units would be bigger, right? But for our smaller districts and charters that may have a secondary divisor, now, some of you might eventually have secondary. There are divisors in the secondary that are 12 and 13 and a half, which doing the shift doesn't help. Actually shifting secondary, here you'll notice that the secondary is 2.8. Here there's no secondary because statute allows it not to be shifted, and it actually, in this case, because their secondary divisor, appropriate divisor is 12, actually shifting to a divisor of 14 and a half hurts them. Now, the complication here, oh yeah, it hurts them here. That's why this is less. This is a good tool, yes.
When you say exceptional, you're referring to exceptional students.
Exceptional, special education.
Oh, special education, okay. got it,
Sorry,
got it.
yeah, special education. So, yeah, special education.
And I'll cover this some more too. And you can always reach out to Dean
Yeah.
with questions. And the great news is you'll also have a regional IC representative for your area. So for Eastern Idaho Twin Falls, it's Roger Evans. And then Amy Ziegler is for the Boise area up north typically. And they'll come help you with any IC questions, but questions on what to do on attendance or calculating your support units, that's definitely Dean. And we work very, very closely. If you ask Amy or Dean a question that should be for the other one, they will refer you to the other person. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean. All right, we have Alexander McCann, who is our staffing expert.
Miss Julie. So yeah, where Dean leaves off with the support units, I'll come in with SBA. And, one important thing, to understand is that, salary-based apportionment, it's an allocation model. It's not a reimbursement model. So you're not funded on actual people. We are not cutting you a check that covers the salary and benefits for John Doe, right? We use averages that are derived from your staff's career ladder placement or their administrative index. Tina already briefly covered IC. On my end, we use the staff demographic and employment file and the staff assignment file to, gather the data used in the SBA calculations. Dean showed you the proposed IC upload calendar for next year. One thing I cannot say enough, and I'll probably say it 5 more times, is anytime you upload your data, you need to run reports after to make sure that what you uploaded is correct. Whether that pertains to your student data or your staffing data, that's a way of eliminating any type of data errors that will impact your funding. And it's always harder to fix it afterwards or a year later or 2 years later than, looking at your reports and taking care of it right from the get-go. So staffing pulls in the support units, the midterm support units, and they're the foundation of how the schools are funded. SBA uses the support units to calculate allocated FTEs. So we have 4 staffing categories: instructional pupil service, they're funded on the career ladder. Administrative, they're funded on the experience education index, and you're classified. They have a base salary that's multiplied by the staffing ratio. So the 4 categories, they have 4 different staffing ratios assigned to the respective category. For admin staff, it's 0.075. Instructional pupil service, it's 1.01 combined, and classified, it's 0.375. So I have a couple of examples in terms of the different staffing categories that belong to the different ratios. Again, we have assignment codes, so the 4,000 series and 01 through 31999 for teachers. We have 32,000 for your pupil service staff, and then you have classified, that's your business managers, office support, paras, and so on and so forth. It's important that you use the correct assignment code for that staff position. So, and I'll get to that a few slides down the road, but if you report somebody with the incorrect assignment code pertaining to their position, that could possibly result in a funding adjustment. So the administrative folk, your principal, charter admin, so on and so forth, they're funded on the admin index. Your instructional and pupil service staff used to be funded on the admin and experience index, but with the career ladder that went away and they were put on the career ladder. So we always look at the last Friday in September, that's your snapshot date. If you have somebody active as of that date, they're going to be pulled into the funding. If they leave before that person's not captured, it won't be included, they won't be included in the funding. And also, if somebody is hired after the snapshot date, they're not going to be included in the funding. So this is really a cutoff date. We look at how things were as of that date. For your admin folks, well, we'll look in terms of experience, we'll look at their prior experience, if they're coming in from out of state, if they have potentially taught at the college level. However, if that's the case, that college teaching experience must be equivalent to K-12. With college teaching, often they have a contract, 80% research, 20% instruction, or 60-40 or whatnot. If they teach, maybe 1,500 hours throughout the year, and it's an 80-20 split, then they're going to have enough classroom experience like they would have had in a K-12 classroom. So we sometimes get folks calling in, like teachers, well, why, am I placed on the career ladder at this level? I should be higher up. Well, for one, instructional does not pertain to this determination. And also, if they have taught at university level, most likely they had this research and instructional component. When it comes to counting years of experience, we do not count the current year. So if somebody starts in 24-25, and I've seen that data come across, the charter school reports them with a year of experience in Idaho. It's their first year in Idaho. They cannot have had that experience because the year is not over. In order to be counted for prior experience, they have to have at least 0.5 FT or more. That would equate to a year. Anything below 0.5 is not counted. Each year is considered separately, so you cannot, have somebody with 0.25 the first year, 0.25 the second year, and the third, and count them as one, or 0.75 for 1 year, because it's not the same year, right? We look at each year independently. At times, we'll see new data come in, and they report the person with 3 years of prior experience. But then when I see, well, the prior year, they reported with 4 years of experience for 2 years in a row. So that data doesn't make sense. When you upload your data, you run your reports, and you compare what you uploaded with the information you have. And sometimes it's really just common sense that somebody who's born in 85, they cannot be in IC with 40 years of experience. It just is not possible. So when we come across data like that, where it just, if you take a look at it, you don't even have to verify anything else. You can see that there was a glitch, that, somebody, a typo, so on and so forth. For the admin index, we look at the highest degree claimed for funding, which may not be the highest degree obtained. So we have this admin and experience index. This is right out of Idaho code, where it shows the degrees and then the years. And depending on where they fall on this matrix, reporting them with a bachelor's plus 60 is more beneficial than reporting them with a master's and 0 credits because the index is higher here. So that doesn't mean that, you know, the other degree with the lower index, lower experience and education should not be reported. It just should not be reported as the highest degree. So the first degree that you fill out, you know, your file, when you update your data, is always going to be the highest degree for funding. This matters for your administrative staff first and foremost. However, you could have somebody who is an instructional staff member. They're funded on the career ladder. At the time they're on the career ladder, this won't matter as much. However, if they ever go into admin or, you know, split 50-50, it's going to be a problem because if this is incorrectly reported from on the admin side, and if they're split funded, their admin piece, their admin SBA would not be calculated correctly. We'll see that with smaller locations where you have a superintendent, for example, and they teach a class or two. For the calculation itself, how SBA is calculated, we look at the admin, we look at the experience and education index. Again, it's one of the, you know, numbers here multiplied with the base salary that's set by Idaho code. That's your average administrative salary for instructional staff. We look at the education allocations, CTE allocations, and the career ladder amounts divided by the total instructional FTE. That's your weighted average salary. And for pupil service staff, it's the same calculation minus the CTE allocations. Quick word about salary schedules. We often get calls from teachers and they say, well, tell me, you know, about my district salary schedule. I'm paid this, why am I not paid that? Your board determines what you pay your staff. The state has no say in that. So if we get calls and, you know, teachers ask about their pay, I'll say, you need to talk to your employer because salary set schedules are set locally. They may or may not line up with career ladder amounts in the admin index, but they could be higher, they could be lower in comparison to what we fund them. So for example, somebody is funded as a P1, but the district, and let's say that's $55,000 for funding purposes on our end, but the location can certainly pay them $60,000 or $100,000 or what they see fit. We have no say in that. We do not determine the compensation. About a third of locations use the career ladder as a salary schedule. Another third, they have a combination between the salary schedule and some other internal process schedule. And another third, they use steps and lanes merely based on education and experience. So that third that has a mix, they usually do maybe R1 through R3, and then the higher, more experienced people, they land on some sort of a steps and lanes setup. So I already added the words career ladder. If you pass that through, please. The career ladder is a mechanism to allocate funding for instructional pupil service staff. It's based on performance and it replaced the prior index model. And it consists of 3 runs, RP and AP, R1 through R3, P1 through P5, and AP1 through AP5. 24-25 was the final year of implementation. So with AP5 being in effect this year, the career ladder has been fully implemented. With the career ladder, there's 2 key concepts you have to keep in mind. One, placement for, folks who've never been on the career ladder, and then movement once you're on it, how you progress through the different rungs. People who've never been on the career ladder are typically your brand new teachers, like out of school, they graduate in May, they start teaching in September, they have no experience. They're placed as an R1, but you can also have folks who have been in the classroom in Idaho. They left the classroom, went into administration before the career ladder was implemented. If they now come back to the classroom, they're essentially treated as somebody who's never been on the career ladder. And then you can certainly have your folks from out of state who are coming to Idaho, depending on what type of experience they have, and if they're recommended for an endorsement, they would be appropriately placed. So when I talk about that in the career ladder guidance document that you guys just passed around, it explains what the career ladder is and what that. It talks about the professional, advanced professional endorsements, which are handled by teacher certification. It also has a Q&A section at the very end with examples, questions that we get as to why, somebody is placed here and not there, and why somebody with, 25 years of experience, a terminal degree, is going to be placed as an R1, not an AP5. And the reason for that would be because they don't have an endorsement and they were not able to provide any performance documents from the prior employer. So the performance component is a big deal when it comes to the career ladder. In order to get this out-of-state performance, we have what's called Form 10. It's posted on our website. The 25-26 Form 10 will be posted sometime early summer. So we, mock up the form with the New Year's. But this is something we use to place people on the career ladder according to their prior experience and performance. So for somebody coming in from out of state, they have 10 years of experience. We would need to know if they met Idaho equivalent performance metrics at the previous employer. So if they're coming in from Utah, we would need to see this form completed. There's fields on there that indicate whether the person met or did not meet performance, and your charter administrator will need to certify that that information is correct. In the beginning, I briefly mentioned that we do not fund specific people. We work off average allocated salaries and support units. However, who you hire matters in terms of your average here. So we'll have, for example, 3 folks, 1 FTEs, they generate this allocation on the career ladder. It's rolled up in your average. However, you're funded based on allocated FTEs. So that's your support units multiplied by your staffing ratio that generates the allocated FTEs. And then this is multiplied by the average. So, in this example opposite, we still have your average, your allocated FTEs, but your average, because you have 2 more people, you have a total of 5 FTE to generate your average allocation. So that goes up in comparison to the 3 versus the 5, multiplied by still the same 3 FTE. So your actual allocation is about 151,000, which is a difference of about almost 9,000. So if you hire staff at 1 FTE, generating this amount in funding, that doesn't mean you get that amount. It's all rolled up into this average. And that's why it's difficult to say, hey, I hired John Doe, how much funding does this person generate? It's like a stew, you have all the ingredients, you throw it in a pot and cook it down. And then you have your average multiplied by the allocated FTEs. We have 3 payments, February, May, and July, that are based on actual data. Julie will talk about that a little bit later about the 5 foundation payments. But February, May, and July, that's when we post the supporting documents to the secure website. They're in this foundation payment folder. And it will include your FTE reports and your SBA worksheets and other documents from Dean, for example. Dean mentioned that we have templates on the public school finance website. There is a template for charters to work the way through the salary-based apportionment worksheet. So it's important that the people who you hire are properly certificated for what they're teaching. So in other words, if you hire a teacher to teach math, you need to make sure that they have the appropriate credentials and endorsement to teach math. If they don't, we will make an adjustment of the bottom line. So this glimpse of the SBA worksheet. This is your benefits amount, and this would be the total salary amount. So if we have someone who is not properly certificated, we will make an adjustment and we will withhold the actual contract salary, contract benefits from your total payment. We get a report from teacher certification, and they will tell me Jane Doe was teaching math. She's not certificated to teach math. That was her only assignment. Her contract salary was $60,000. We will take that money off your funding. Yes.
Does that happen if they're on an interim certificate to maybe add an endorsement and it'll be done at the end of the year? They have like 1 year to meet the charter school criteria.
So they would have to be through the current year. So they can start teaching and don't have the certification in place, and you can work with certification to get that straightened out. But if that year ends and you hit July 1st and this is not taken care of, you won't get that funding back.
Oh, okay.
So in terms of endorsements and credentials, definitely, and I don't know if you guys had certification in here already, or if they're still, those are the people to
As long
talk
as they
to.
do what they're supposed to do, they get
Yeah.
that endorsement at the end of the school year. Because I think you can add an endorsement and you have to do a year mentorship. So at the end of the year, your mentor would sign off and say you've done X, Y, Z.
So that would be a question for them. That's their expertise. Yeah, yeah.
But you would still get the funding back in that
If it's
July.
taken care of that year.
Okay.
Because we had folks who, well, got taken care of July 15th. That's too late.
So they need to send that paperwork
Yeah, I mean,
immediately. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, it really should be done even before, or
Yeah.
at least at the beginning of first half of the school year. So in terms of the adjustment, as I said, we use an actual contract salary. So that means your person could be funded as a P1 at 55,000. Their contract is 70. We'll take the 70,000. Also, it doesn't matter what fund source. With SBA, we're only talking about Fund 10, that's a general fund. If your person is funded out of special ed or title, and they're not properly certificated, we still will remove the funding for that person. These are just a couple of things. I think if you actually go to the PowerPoint version of this, you can, we have the live link there. You can just follow the links and click on them and you'll have the Career Ladder Guidance Manual. That's the document that I just handed out. I'll link to our IC website and then the Certification Professional Standards website. Then they have a resource document on there about the professional endorsements. We also have an SBA 101 and a Career Ladder training that we can send out. You're
Is that a
dying,
webinar or?
they're just PowerPoint,
Oh,
if you're dying to know more about that at this time. Questions?
So while Camper transitions into doing calendars, I want to let you know that we do a monthly webinar for business managers. The school finance team comes together. We'll pull in people from certification or from the state board to talk to schools. They're the first Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m. And, we send the email to, I think it goes to superintendents and business managers. Anyone is welcome to attend those. They're pretty fast paced. We're giving you a summary of what has happened, what we're working on. And then at 11 o'clock, we do a targeted session from 11 to noon. Someone, it might be Dean doing a deep dive into attendance or Alex doing a deep dive into staffing. Right now, what we're doing for the January, February, March, well, we didn't do one in March because they're meeting in person, which is where we were yesterday. And April is we're doing a legislative update, our executive team is. And so, you're welcome to join those now. We would have to have your email addresses to include those, especially our schools that are starting this fall. But, all right, thank you. All right, Amber.
All right, hi, my name's Amber Worthington. I'm just going to take just a few minutes to talk about instructional hour calendars. Previously, the department has collected these each year and helped monitor them to ensure that charters and districts were meeting the minimum required instructional hours. This year, the department is no longer collecting these hours or monitoring the hours. We are relying on you guys to do all of the tracking of those. Previous years, we've always had the calendar template and the manual online for your guys' use. We have continued to do this just to make things easier for you guys. We highly recommend using our template because it has worked previously and that we often would get records requests for emergency closures or what your calendar was. So we just are hoping that you guys will still use it. That way, if you get a records request, you can provide that information. The forms are currently on our website. So if you go to the department's website, scroll to the bottom to the school finance portion. I've highlighted the two documents that I'm talking about today. The calendar manual is multiple pages. It's pretty in depth about just the instructional calendar, the hours, the requirements. It goes over different examples. Check it out. And then the template is the bottom one that is downloaded in Excel format. I believe there's 4 tabs. The first tab is all instructions, talks about the different color cells, what they mean, which ones you'll want to fill out. There's a lot of formulas built in, and so there's some protected cells and they're locked, but you don't want to enter into the wrong thing. Some of this you can still indicate if you're a 4-day school calendar and do the stuff on the top of the form, but we're not collecting this, so that's just for your reference. You will want to complete a different worksheet for each grade grouping with a unique schedule so that if you do end up closing, say your elementary school, you don't have to, or like even just kindergarten for whatever reason, you don't have to reduce your instructional hours for all of your calendars. Just makes it easier to track those hours. Idaho Code 33512 sets the minimum hours of instruction per grade level. Starts with kindergarten for half-day requirement of 450 all the way up to 990 through grades 9 through 11. As you can see, it drops down for grade 12 and alternative. I'll talk about a few different reasons that there are reduced hours. And then as a reminder, you're not required to submit these forms, but be prepared to provide documentation of compliance. We do recommend that you build a buffer in of your hours so that if you have to close, you're not immediately in the negative of your hours. So if you don't know how much of a buffer to do, I recommend reaching out to different charters or districts in your area so you can see what's normal. Like if you're North Idaho, it might be different than if you're down here. Here's a few different reasons that you can reduce the instructional hours. Grade 12 students, the school year ends earlier for many of the grade 12 students, so you can reduce those hours by 11 or reduce by 11 hours. And then you can do up to 22 hours for qualified staff development activities and 11 hours for kindergarten. You can have as many staff development hours as you want, but it will be capped at that 22 and 11 hours for kindergarten. Some activities to not be, that aren't considered staff development are teacher work prep days, work days, mentor time, and parent-teacher conferences. I talk fast, so I am sorry. And then emergency closures is one of the last reason I'm going to talk about for that you can reduce the instructional hours, and that's due to adverse weather conditions or facility failures. For instructional hour calendar purposes only, a closure due to widespread sickness is not a qualified emergency closure. You can still reach out to Dean for an impact attendance, but that's a different topic for a different day. Our forms are on our website, so if you do need to close for an emergency closure, you'll fill out that emergency closure form and email that to Dean Reich and myself. You can take off 11 hours for emergency closures. And then what qualifies as an instructional hour? An instructional hours include the time when students are under the guidance and direction of the teacher engaged in the teaching process, and they should only be counted when all students are expected to be in attendance. With school assemblies, testing, and other related activities that directly involve the students can be included, but transportation to and from, lunch periods, breaks, recess, passing periods, those should not be counted. Oh my gosh, whoa. What happened?
Can structured recess be counted? Some states in Montana, you could.
But we're in Idaho, so.
Just ask.
Their questions.
And a question I've been getting a lot of recently, and it's more relevant to school districts, but do I need to meet both the 152 minimum day requirement in addition to the minimum instructional hour requirement? Short answer is no. All districts and charter schools must offer the minimum required instructional hours that is found in Idaho Code 33512. And then, can we have school on a holiday? It depends on the holiday. Idaho Code 33512 subsection 9 requires the following days be school holidays, so New Year's Day and Memorial Day, Independence Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas Day. And then the other holidays below, you can still have school on those days, but you have to do an appropriate ceremony, and that's listed on Idaho Code 73108. And that is the end of my really short presentation. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me at any time. I'm glad to help or get you in the right direction.
While we transition to budget, any questions for Amber? And then I'm,
Is there a minimum requirement for recess?
no, what Idaho Code 33512 kind of starts with is it's the duty of the board to set the calendar for the school. So you can, going back to the structured recess, I was going to ignore that comment, but if you have they have to be under the guidance and direction of a teacher in the teaching process. So if you have gym class at 10 a.m. every day and you have a qualified teacher teaching that, I wouldn't call it recess, but you could treat it as their morning break. Is that delicate enough?
Structured recess, yes.
So, so I'm trying to be really careful. We typically just say no and move on.
Sure.
But it's a good question. I would really highly recommend that you look at the calendars of the school district in your area where you're opening the school. And kind of, no, I'm not going to suggest you follow what they do, but they have learned when students are not coming. You know, why does East Idaho have a harvest break? Well, because that's in that midterm reporting period, first day of school through the first Friday in November. And it's that period that drives 70% of your funding, because that drives your staffing funding. And if you have half your kids out because they're helping, or they say they're helping with potato harvest, that's going to very significantly impact your attendance. It's going to pull you down. It's going to get you a lot less money. So they have vacation there then, and that's fine. That's the prerogative of the board. What the schools in your area have hopefully done is they've identified poor days of attendance and they have a staff development that day. They have a vacation day that day. That is something that is so in your board's control to maximize your funding. And so after a couple of years, you can go to the secure site and look at all of Dean's various attendance reports, and you can isolate poor days of attendance and find out why. I mean, is it hunting season? You know, what is it that's doing it? Are you holding school during the fair? Not recommended. Because you're gonna lose kids to that. The other thing to think about is if there's a snow closure and they're advertising that, you know, Boise and West Ada have closed school, they may think that you've also closed school even if you haven't. And so even when there's emergency closures, you might want to kind of follow for the first year or two what other schools in the area are doing. Any questions on
You do online school during a snow day if you have multiple days.
that is another tough topic, and the department's coming up with guidance. And did you just say no?
I said yes.
The multiple
So if you are not already identified as a virtual school, it's really not.
It's happening too often where the kids are leaving their pads at school.
Yeah.
And then the next day is a snow day, and so they're calling it a great attendance, snow day of attendance, virtual day. But I mean, the parents know their pads and in the locker at the school or their desk at school. It's been abused a little, maybe possibly been abused a little bit. And so the public perception is pretty bad on it, and the department is developing pretty firm guidance on that. Okay, any other comments, questions on anything we
I just
covered?
wanted you to clarify on the break or recess. There's nothing saying that set amount of time needs to be.
It's all determined by your local board.
So what if there was no recess?
I'm very tired.
I know, I'm just
We're
saying,
not
like,
paying
there's no
attention.
regulation on recess. Okay.
Not that I'm aware of, not for, as it impacts us. Now for federal, Josh, I'm not aware of
No,
anything.
there's no guidelines out there. It's just community and research and best practice.
My clarification, or my clarification only,
But we don't.
if a school codes that 2-week fair, time as vacation, it doesn't impact.
Correct. It's not
No
counted.
day, sorry.
It's not counted as one of your days in session. So therefore it doesn't, so like instead of having 50 days during the midterm, you only have 40. And so the ADA wouldn't be impacted because it's just not counted.
And it's still 70% of that 40 days. Of not the
40 days.
The-
It makes up that.
So
Makes up that
Those 40 days
70%
makes
makes
up that.
50 days.
I said it incorrectly, but yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, the first day of school through the first Friday in November, maximize your attendance. That's
Nice.
my best advice for you, besides hiring a really good business manager. So, okay, Carol and Ashley are going to present on the budgets right
Carol's
now.
gonna help me point at things up there because the laser won't work on the TV, so. But Carol and I are here to present to you today school budgets. We're gonna go over your budget process a little bit first. So Idaho code does require that each school district and charter must prepare and adopt a budget for each year. Those will be submitted to us as well, so make note of that. The first thing you'll want to do is schedule your budget hearing. And so you'll have to do your hearing notice and your 4-year summary form, which we will go through and show you those forms. But those will need to be published 10 days prior to your budget hearing. And then once your budget hearing is set, you'll need to set it first 28 days prior to your July meeting. Your July meeting is where you're going to go over your budget. So, and that will be 14 days afterwards for your budget hearing.
You can adopt your budget at your public hearing or at a special meeting within 14 days.
Okay, and then again, you will want to submit it to our department, and that will be 21 days or less after your budget is adopted. And that will need to be signed. That should be no later than July 15th. That's our cutoff date. And then you will want to also post that to our charter school website 30 days after it's approved.
And I just wanted to stress that the whole budget process is an Idaho code, so you want to follow that closely.
Okay, this is where Carol's gonna do a lot of pointing. So this kind of our recommendation on how to keep track of all of those dates. So we recommend you find your July meeting on your calendar and circle that. And then you'll count backwards 28 days to find where your budget hearing will be. And then you will count back 10 days from that, for your publishing your notice of your hearing and for your summary. And then you will want to recount from your budget hearing date, 21 days forward, to submit it to our department. And then from there, you'll want to count 30 days forward, for posting on your website. It's a little all over the place, but it's probably the easiest way to track those things.
And you don't have to wait to submit to us. Once it's approved, you can just submit it that day to us and post it to your website. And then one thing Ashley just said that I wanted to comment on was we have a form that you have to publish for a 4-year summary. Well, if this is your first year of operation, you'll obviously only have your projected.
We're gonna look at that in a
Oh,
minute,
okay,
too.
sorry.
No problem.
So the drop deadline is
Oh, sorry.
15th of July, right?
Right.
So we need to work. No later than that, we should be submitted to you.
Yes.
So these forms will be found on our website. So you will go to the Department of Education website and find public school finance section. I will show you on one of the next slides where you can find that. But you will want to submit a cover page, a certification page that also must be signed, your 4-year publication form, your estimating state M&O revenues, your summary statement, and then either separate revenue and expenditure or combined. That's up to you, what you decide to use or which is easier for you. And then this is kind of what our website looks like and where you will find those forms. Our budget forms are going to be in that top section up there. And then down below, you'll find all of your worksheets and forms to estimate your revenues for your budget. So those are all very important. And then another one to look at over there is your special distributions. That's important to look at once a year. We do update it every year. And so those are important to make sure you are aware of them. Those are certain payments and funding. So make sure you are checking that every year.
This list is a list of how to budget for each one, each special distribution, and everyone has a contact name and number and email if you have any questions.
So then we'll kind of go through what the forms look like. This one is our cover page. You'll want to make sure your charter school name, your LEA number, which is a 3-digit number, which will be provided to you if you don't already have it, assuming you are due, and then your county. This one is your certification page. We don't usually look at the left side. You can fill it out if you'd like, but we require that you have the right section filled out. So you definitely need your charter school administrator signature, the signature for the chairperson of your board. Basically, that entire side needs to be filled out so that we can verify that it was approved by your board.
Yeah, and we also like to have the contact person, so if they need to get a hold of you for anything.
This is what your 4-year summary is going to look like for you guys for being new. You should only have data for your proposed budget this year. And then next year and so on and so forth, you'll keep building on that.
Is the clicker not working? No, it's not. That way, because that's where the laptop is. Oh, there.
This one is our estimating M&O state revenue. We have a little bit of examples up there to show you where it's coming from. So the top little box up there is going to be from your best 28 weeks ADA, like Dean mentioned earlier. That second box is your state distribution factor. That is auto-populated and it will change every year. So don't worry about that box. We should have it already filled in. Your top section below is going to be your salary-based apportionment, and we will go through where that comes from as well on the next slide. And then your bottom one's going to be from other documents such as your tuition equivalency, transportation. You'll have to talk to transportation for that data. So they kind of come from different areas, but that's kind of a rundown from where you can look.
And the portion down here is just for school districts. That's why it's crossed out. You don't need to worry about that. It has to do with tax levies. And I just wanted to stress that be sure you're using the correct year forms because that does change every year, the state distribution factor.
Pointing. Oh, no, you got it. So this is like the example of the SBA and how it feeds into your estimating M&O sheet. So you could use this to glance at where those are, but there's titles next to each data point on your SBA, and it should correlate with your estimating M&O. Should be pretty clear, but that's a good visual representation of where you can find those data points.
I also wanted to mention that these numbers here are revenue codes, so it tells you where you place those in your revenue general fund.
This is what your revenue pages will look like. You will usually have one per fund code. So your revenues are going to be organized by your fund number. Then they'll be classified as local, state, or federal. And then they will be coded by the source of the revenue. So on the left side of your sheet, you will have your local revenues, and on the right top half, you will have your state, and the right bottom half, you will have your federal. And there is also a line for transfers in. A lot of schools have transfers in.
Well, these are the revenue codes that were on the estimating M&O worksheet that we just looked at. So that's where you'll place those, the state support, transportation, benefit apportionment, all those.
What counts as revenues in or transfers in?
Usually you're going to be either moving funds or just showing that you're moving money into that fund. So each
From
year,
another fund.
yeah. And it should, we will go over that too, but it should match. So anything you're moving out of a fund should be the exact thing that's moving into a fund. Should balance out. This is what your expenditure pages will look like. You will usually have two of those for each fund. And expenditures are organized by your fund number, your function program code, and then your object code. It's also important to check that the bottom right section down there to make sure that everything is balancing before you submit your budget. This is the summary statement. This one's kind of a good check to make sure that your budget is going to balance. So all of your revenue and expenditure pages should align with these amounts as well. So you will want to make sure your transfers in and transfers out net to zero. Basically, that money that you're moving is the same that you're moving in somewhere. And your contingency reserve cannot exceed 5% of your general fund. That is an Idaho code, so make sure that you are double checking that before it's submitted to us. We do have error messages at the bottom of that sheet, so it will tell you if you have anything that's not matching up and if you need to fix it before submitting it to us. This is kind of just a key to a good budget, I guess. Make sure you're using all of the forms that we offer you. It helps to provide the best estimates for you, so you're not surprised when the numbers are not anywhere near the same. This is contact information for submitting your budget and all of the forms. We do prefer email, but you can do mail or faxing if you prefer. This is kind of the outlook of our calendar, but in a step order. So you first will probably want to work on your estimates, such as support units and staff, and getting those numbers figured out before you do any of your budget figures. Those are very important in your budget. And then you'll want to schedule your public hearing. Then you can complete your budget forms. Again, another reminder just to make sure all of those errors are corrected before submitting it to us. Then you can submit or publish your 4-year summary publication in the paper with your hearing date, time, location, 10 days prior to your budget hearing. And then you can hold your public hearing and formally adopt your budget. That will be 28 days prior to your regular July meeting. And then you will want to submit your budget to the department 21 days after your adoption, and again, no later than July 15th. And then you can post your budget onto your website within 30 days. Some things to remember when going through this process. They are public documents. Like we've all kind of said, all of this can be requested from anybody, so we will have to send it. Just know it is public information. Again, make sure all of your documents have your school name and LEA number on them. It helps us keep track of your documents. Make sure you keep track of your critical dates and timelines. And then make sure you know where our forms are. If you guys get confused at all, feel free to reach out and we can point you in the right direction. We do have certain codes that we use for our budgets. It aligns with IFARMS. It just, in our system, it makes everything uniform. So we do ask that you use those codes. Otherwise, we will not know what you're using that money for. And then make sure you are using our proper templates as well. And then again, for the 5th time also, please make sure those error messages are cleared before you submit it. Oh, we do ask that you have somebody available in the summer just to respond to any questions we may have on your budgets. Amended budgets are pretty similar to your regular annual budgets. Same process of making sure those things are certified, and you will have to have a hearing, and that will have to be a week prior to your meeting before your proposal. We don't have the same timeline that your annual budget has, so you can submit your amended budget throughout the year when you feel it should be amended. Any changes should be made. And again, we do have dates when you are in this process, but it doesn't align with that timeline. So just make sure that you're going through that same process of getting it certified, signed by your superintendent or charter administrator before submitting it to us. And then you will want to post it as well. That can be found in Idaho Code 33402 in case you would like more information on that. One last thing. Oh, two last things. So some key points for the amended budgets. Again, use those same forms you would for your annual budgets. And then make sure you're publishing your amended 4-year summary form with your date, time, and location. And then do your certification page again.
Yeah, and please make sure the certification page is signed by both the administrator and the board chair. We require both signatures.
And one last thing does not relate to budgets, but this is building reconfigurations. So that again can be found on our school website as well. Those will be submitted to me at this time for right now. Those will be anything for your address changes, your name changes, grade changes, any changes you have to your school. So those will be submitted to me at any point of whenever you're changing.
So Ashley and Carol, have they already, the school's opening this in July, have they already submitted this form to you?
This, I get all the information from Rachel. They've all been
I set them up initially. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel.
We have to submit that every year. We're adding the grade level.
If you're, if you're changing the grades you're teaching, yes.
Yeah, and please be sure it's signed too by the administrator.
In the best practice, I didn't see anything about audits. Is it just best practice within the organization to have audits for the budgets every year, twice a year? I mean,
I believe Andrew's gonna talk about audits later.
It's in code.
I was gonna say like that's, I didn't see anything about that. That's.
So, I have a couple of comments, I wanted to make. Amending your budget is something every school does. You know, what do you think in May and June is going to happen for the next school year? Well, once you have all of your teachers hired, once your students are actually showing up, you're going to have a lot better idea of what your budget will be. It's a very common thought or process for schools to kind of like informally amend their budget at their board meetings. And at the end of the year, when they are setting their next year's budget, they go ahead and they formally amend the current year's budget at the same time, because it's a very expensive process when you have to post in the newspaper your meetings, your hearing notices. So they combine that meeting the second year and do both the prior year and the next year, I guess the current year and the next year at the same time. So something to think about to save you a little bit of money. And then that state M&O worksheet that they showed up where it had support units, distribution factor, we pulled in the salary apportionment money. That is the one page I use to estimate your advance payment if you request one, and I'll talk about that more. And I use it to estimate your 50% of your funding for the year to pay you in August if you don't have an advance, and another 20% in November. This is an honest example that happened this year. We had a school over project what they were going to have. They estimated they were going to have 20 some support units. And it's very common for me to walk over and talk to Rachel to say, hey, based on their lottery, does this look reasonable? Or to Michelle Taylor, who is our former school choice person. And they're like, oh yeah, we haven't heard any differently. Well, it turns out their actual support units were about 4 for this year. And when you look at 23 times the statewide average of $146,000 compared to 4 support units times $146,000, with just the advance payment of 25% of their funds, they were overpaid for the entire school year. So of course, you do not want a phone call from me at payment time because I'm going to call you, and I called them and I asked for money back. I asked for the full amount of the overpayment back, and it was about $740,000. And they were expecting the call because they had reworked their budget once they had actual numbers. You do not wait to do that. You need to be doing that every month at your board meetings, reviewing an updated budget. So sorry, I've got to share horror story because you guys all have great ideas, but it's the finances that close our charter schools, problems with finances. And so we want you to succeed. All right, any questions for Carol or Ashley or Carol on the budgets? All right, Andrew is going to talk to you about all different kinds of things. We say staffing, we say attendance, we say budgets, and we say other when we talk about Andrew.
We'll be taking a break after Andrew.
And then we'll take a break. So thank you, Andrew.
Andrew Konopacki, and yeah, like Julie said, I kind of cover a lot of different reporting primarily, and I won't go through many things. There are 3 topics we'll cover today: IFARMS, tuition rates, and charter school facility funds. That's what's going to matter to you today. Down the road, there'll be other plenty of reports and things like that once you guys open up and things like that. But that's more of a topic for a different day, and I'm always available once you get down the road and want to talk more about those to discuss those. Well, we'll start off with IFARMS. I try to have Idaho code references in the bottom or title slides if you want to look more into the source information on these things I'm covering. And the biggest one is start using acronyms. What does IFARMS stand for? It's the Idaho Financial Accounting Reporting Management System. Easier to say IFARMS, so we just abbreviated it down to that. And what it really does for us is our chart of accounts that allows for uniform, consistent data reporting among all the schools. And then the next item, we'll kind of continue that thought with, we don't mandate a specific software for your accounting purposes. So like 2M, Skyward, some schools use QuickBooks. which I don't fully recommend because it makes fund-based accounting difficult with just limitations within the software. But you can choose what software works best for your school and your budget. It just needs to be able to incorporate this chart of accounts. The reason why is at the end of the day, we aggregate and pull in all of the financial information from all the schools, and we need to be able to merge it in an apples to apples fashion. So we at the state can do our reporting for state reports to the state legislature and federal reporting, for Title I funds and things like that as well. So it's very important that when you're choosing your software vendor and how you're going to do all your accounting and finance work, that you consider the chart of accounts and how is that going to be able to implement and integrate into that system for you guys. When you do set it up, it's again fund-based accounting. So it's not just a huge pool of money that you're getting in and then your revenues in, expenditures out, especially with federal funds or other different specific state funds that we send you. We need to be able to track that for the different programs effectively that your schools are receiving funds for, and then how those are being spent. So when you're talking about transfers in and transfers out, you may receive some funds in for a specific purpose, but maybe the expenditure is the funds are authorized to be used in a different fashion. So you're transferring it to another fund number. I mean, it's all your money, but internally, it's just how you're tracking and accounting for those funds from one to the other. So you're moving money within your own bank accounts, but you're just making sure that it's being accounted for correctly. So, and with each one of those funds, every revenue source you have should have a fund number and an account code. Every expenditure needs to have a fund number, a function code, and a sub-object code. Each expenditure should have a school code. Federal requirements have for charter schools, it should be easy. Most of you guys are probably gonna have one location, so you have one school code and you can attribute most of your costs to that school. Larger school districts where they have middle schools, elementary schools, and so on and so forth, they'll have different charges to different schools, but we need to be able to get it down to the school level as much as possible for federal reporting purposes. We do have a IFARMS manual that dives into a lot more of this on a more detailed level that you can review. It's on our school finance website. It's a digital copy of this presentation. You should be able to click on the links and get access to that as well for more on this. This is a quick little screenshot to kind of give you some view of what our expenditures chart of accounts looks like. There's 3 different worksheets really that we summarize our chart of accounts to. One for expenditures, one for revenues, and one for the balance sheet. On the left-hand side, you have all the fund numbers. We have it set up in a pretty sequential, logical fashion. Your fund 100 is your general fund. It's where most of your funds are going to go into, and most of your daily maintenance and operation expenditures will come out of. The 230s are going to be for your local funds. So if you have a student activity fund or other local type revenue sources from your local community that you're setting up, you can use the 230s. 240s are for the state funds. So we send out, for instance, by the technology payment or substance abuse type payments that are all state funds, and those will be tracked in that 240 series. 250 through 289 is going to cover all the different federal funds. This includes special education. We're closing out all the different COVID, ARPA type funds that went out during that era, are all being tracked through those fund numbers. And then beyond that, we have some for bonds, for construction funds, for trust funds, and other different kinds of things like that as well. So there is a reason, method to the madness of how we have these all set up. But at the end of the day, you can jump into the IFARMS manual I referenced, and we'll give a description of each of them. On the right-hand side is expenditures. So we have it broken down by the 500 series is instructions, 600s are your student support, 700s are non-instructional, and then there's a couple other handful miscellaneous towards the bottom. And then there's another section on there about object codes. But it looks like a lot of random numbers, but there is kind of a pretty easy flow to it once you kind of get used to it. Your accounting business managers and people should be able to pick up on that and figure out how it works and incorporates for your charter schools. all of this comes into two major products. One of them was mentioned earlier with the audit. The other half of what we really look for is an annual financial report. So what this means and looks like is that at the end of the school year, once your audit is complete, all of the adjusting journal entries and everything is balanced and reconciled. You're just going to export an Excel file from that accounting software, and that will include revenues, expenditures, and balance sheet activity. And then we have a portal on our state website called IC that you'll log into and upload that file to. It will do error checking. It will give you, feedback on some of that, how it balances out. We ask that your business manager, everything looks through that, reviews it, make sure it's as accurate as possible. If it's not conformed to the IFARMS chart of accounts, you're going to get a lot of errors and a lot of omitted data, things like that. So that's why we really emphasize from picking your software vendor to everything, consider that chart of accounts and make sure that it's going to be able to be incorporated into however you're doing your accounting to make it easier once we get to submission time. It'll be submitted over to us. We'll review it. It's due by October 31st each year. We always appreciate if you can get it submitted earlier. But this is going to be one half of what we do with our reviews. The other half is the actual audit. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the annual financial report data that you upload to the audit that your board signs and approves off on, and make sure they match. Because if they don't, something's different. And both of them are basically being signed off saying this are our approved financials, and any discrepancies we have within that, we're going to be reaching back to you guys and asking, hey, what's up with this? Idaho Code 67450B is what determines requirements for annual audits. The baseline for this really is that if your expenditures exceed over $250,000 from all different sources, then you must have an audit completed annually. This is even if you don't have any students, if your school year hasn't even started yet. So that is where to go to and look for guidance on audit requirements. 33701 subsection 6 is the one that we usually deal with for most schools, being what they've already started and are up and running. This is due by November 10th. That's per statute, per law. If we do not receive your audit and approved by your board and submitted to us by November 10th, one of those 5 foundation payments will be basically held until we get that document. So we want to get you all the money that you guys are legally entitled to, but we also need you guys to give us the financial information and stuff so we can do our job as well. So something to just keep in mind there. General fund is usually going to be broken down with all the different expenditures in a higher level of detail. We also find it very helpful when doing our reviews if we have that level of detail in a combining statement of revenues and expenditures as well. So it's something to just talk about, work with your auditor on. Single audit requirements, while not always the case for charter schools, is required by federal code if you exceed more than $750,000 in federal expenditures. So these are just for all the federal money, then federal code kicks in. Now that is going to jump up to $1 million beginning, that threshold is going to be on or after October 1st of 24, meaning for an FY26 audit period. That's when that $1 million threshold comes into play. What the submission process for that looks like is once it's approved by your board, just get a PDF copy, email it to myself here at the State Department of Education, and we will take care of the rest, including we'll give a copy over to the Legislative Services Audits Division, as well as the Charter Commission. Again, early submission is always appreciated. It takes a long time to go through right now 192 different charter schools and school districts and review all that data. It's months and months of reviewing. So the sooner we can get that in, the sooner we can start that process and get things going. And then, like I said, it's a review process. It's going back and forth, fund by fund, revenues, expenditures, balance sheet, make sure it all matches up. That's what we do on our end, and what we also ask that your finance folks are doing on their end before they upload to make sure it's a smooth process. What we will do is work to make it reconcile. If there are different fund numbers that are off, we will try to adjust those. If there are any small differences that we can attribute to rounding errors effectively, we'll make those small, adjustments. However, anything that is larger than what we can attribute to either of those, we'll be reaching back to your business manager or whoever submitted it and asking for guidance on what is the correct values that we should be using. Once we do finish our review, we'll re-upload it to that same portal where an automated message will go back to your business manager, and they will need to log in, review the adjustments, and sign off, giving us the authorization to use that adjusted data.
Hey, Andrew, do you guys use a special program or system to review all those budgets?
So for the audit stuff, it's a manual process. As far as the system, it's that portal to an extent, but the review process is manual, which is why it takes months. And then what we do with this is that this creates our IFARMS database. So this is our statewide financial database for an annual year that we then can use for all sorts of different reporting purposes. One of them will be financial summaries report. So we'll post to the school finance website for public transparency, everybody's annual financial reports once it's been reviewed and reconciled. It will also be available to the school districts themselves for their own internal use. School report card that's posted on the department's website will be using this data. Federal surveys, like I mentioned before, with how some of the Title I dollars are allocated, will come out of this data. Tuition rates and tuition equivalency payments will be used from this. Special education child nutrition staff uses it. Indirect cost rates, maintenance of effort, and just any other inquiries that we get all come out of this data, which is why we emphasize it needs to be accurate and why we do such a long and thorough review process. So any questions supporting the market tuition rates on IFARMS? The tuition rates, just briefly cover this. We at the department will calculate these rates using all that data that we just talked about through the annual reports. So the simplest version is that there's exclusions in different aspects of it in the calculation, but think of this is the total costs and expenditures that your charter school has. Here's your students. We come up with roughly per pupil expenditure on an elementary and secondary basis, and that's kind of your tuition rate. And so that's where making sure again that all of your expenditures are accurate within what we're receiving and reviewing is a big deal, because that's also going to affect your tuition rates. 33-1405 also requires that if you have a out-of-state student, so a student whose home district is outside of Idaho, you must charge them the out-of-state tuition rate. There is a waiver process that goes to the State Board of Education for their approval. The waiver has to be submitted before April 1st of the year prior to the student requesting the waiver. So by this April, if they're looking to be waived the tuition rate for the next year. And it's usually just a letter from your board explaining to the State Board of Education why it's in the best interest to not charge this student a tuition rate and for them to be taught in state, without that tuition rate being charged to them. So that's the big takeaway when you're really looking at tuition rates and what that can mean.
Does this apply to elementary school districts too?
Period. It's
Meaning like the elementary kids that go to attend a high school, are they required to pay tuition? Does this apply to that too?
You mean like within the state, like if an elementary kid's taking high school classes? No.
No, what I mean is an elementary school district, K through 8, would they go attend a high school?
This is all out of state. So if they're attending a secondary, if there's only K through 8 available in Idaho and they're going to like Nevada or to Washington for secondary, or vice versa, if they're in Washington and they're coming to Idaho, then
I don't know if I'm explaining very well. So like Arbor Valley is an elementary school district.
Yes.
So when they send their kids to American Falls,
that's in state though. This is the biggest underline with this is if the student is outside of Idaho.
The reason that tuition for outside of the state is because you don't get attendance. You don't get ADA for a kid whose home district is outside of Idaho. So if a kid that is, on the border and they come in from out of state, and they happen to be going to your school,
Canada.
they're excluded from they have attendance with you, obviously, but it's excluded in the system. It's by code that they can't be counted in your ADA. So you would charge them tuition.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's like Lewis and Clarkson, Moscow Pullman up north, or, you know, Ontario, Weiser in that area. Those are kind of those border towns that we usually run into this kind of scenario at, mostly. Going in-state, there's school choice legislation passed a few years ago that makes going to different districts with space available a little bit more flexible. So actually, the next slide kind of covers this. We will calculate 3 rates per elementary and secondary. Although the 2 on the right, where they used to be more common with the new school choice legislation, aren't used as much. The monthly per capita cost is what we call like the gross tuition rate. That is the effectively like per pupil expenditure, like type tuition rate, that if you are coming in from out of state, if you are a student living in Clarkston, Washington, wanting to come over and go to school in Lewiston, Idaho, that per code, you would need to charge them this or request a waiver. And so, yeah, this is what the tuition rates look like. We also have a certificate version of it that we'll submit to every school per Idaho code. For new charter schools, if you were not in operation the prior year, we will give you a tuition rate. Since we don't, because it's all based off of your expenditures and your attendance, right? If you're a brand new school, we don't have that data for you. And so what we do is we take the average charter tuition, school tuition rates, and we use that as a basically placeholder throughout your first year.
That student, if that student's tuition is waived, the district still doesn't get funding for.
Yeah, they do. And so that's why the board will have to determine if it's in the best interest to not charge them tuition. It's either you have to charge them tuition or request the waiver, in which case you should be doing that fully knowing and aware that you're not getting an ADA, you're not getting a sort of state fund towards the student, and you're not getting tuition from the individual. So however you want to make that math work, and if you think it's in the best interest for your school to still teach them, knowing that you're not going to receive funds for it. And so that's really the big takeaways and what I want to cover with tuition rates is just that out of state, code, and then this is kind of what it looks like in the rough generalization of what you can expect on that, how we calculate the tuition rates. Any questions on that? Last bit we're going to talk about is charter school facility funds. The way we kind of categorize this is 3 different segments. If your students are on-site, a hybrid model, which only one district or charter school in the state really qualifies for, or if you're virtual or off-site type students. This just got updated last year with new legislation. Thankfully, that probably doesn't mean much to you since it hasn't, since you're looking at updating the charter schools. But is anybody virtual? Everyone's on site, basically physical facilities. So the big takeaway for this is going to be the way that current Idaho code is written is that you're going to get $400 per attending student who receives the majority of their instruction at a physical facility that is owned or leased by the public charter school. And so by and large, that's what it's going to mean to you guys. So we interpret majority of the instruction as long as 50% of their instruction is happening on site for you guys. You can do the quick math of 400 times your attendance. It'll be based off your best 28-week attendance for your final payment, so you can keep that in mind. But we do 2 payments. We'll try to send out a majority of what we can get you off of your midterm data. We'll send about 70% out, so we can get that funds out to you earlier in the year. And we do 70% to give a little bit of margin of error in case for some reason your attendance decreases in the back half. We're not asking for funds back. So that's just our safety net. That remaining 30%, assuming things are staying pretty flat or level for you, you'll get at the end of the year once we get your best 28-week attendance in and validated. So yeah, I won't cover really the rest of this because the 50% and other aspects of this are only going to apply if you're virtual or hybrid. The one thing I will add to this is so there's some other kind of examples of how we do some of the calculations, but again, those are going to be more for scenarios is what these funds can be actually used for. And these are facility funds, not maintenance funds. And so it's going towards to defray the costs towards loan lease fees and payments and things like that. So think of, your rent or lease for your facilities. Digging a little bit more into Idaho code, when we start talking about sites and fixtures and things like that, there is the material impact to your building and its usefulness. So it gets into this weird, a little bit of a gray area when we start talking about maintenance, because if your roof is leaking or your HVAC or plumbing is out, you can't really use the building. So we consider that part of the real property definition that code talks about, that these funds can be used for. So all of your rent or loans and lease payments qualify, but also if you need to repair a roof, repair a foundation, plumbing, HVAC, boilers, all that kind of stuff that requires it to keep the building materially useful, those would qualify. However, paying your custodial or maintenance salaries is not considered qualifying. If you want to install a new security system or things like that to the building, those wouldn't qualify as far as where these facility funds could be used towards.
They would qualify, would not.
Sorry, yes, they would not. So that's kind of a way to think about that. If you ever have questions about that, once you get to that point, we can always discuss, where we kind of figure that line's at. We always want to work with you to try and get to yes and that make your lives easier, but also Idaho code keeps us accountable. So I think that is all I have. Any questions? Okay. And let's see.
Drew, I think,
Break then?
yeah, Julie said she would be starting at 10:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and break. Thank you, finance team.
Yes. So turn around.
Did you try the down?
South.
Up on the mall?
Yeah.
And down there.
Oh, great. I think they're still closed.
It's not going either either.
But, yeah, they were really good. All right.
Projector.
It's my people.
That's working.
Okay. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and get started because if I go late, we go into your lunchtime. And so I don't want to do that. But my name is Julie Overlay. I work in school finance. I've been here, I mentioned earlier, a really long time. I raised my kids working here. And today I am going to have pulled together what so many of the team has already presented to you. And I'm only going to talk about what's in law right now. There's a lot of legislation this year. There was legislation in prior years to change how we distribute the funds to you. The beauty of school finance is we don't really get that involved with what's going on across the street. We have the executive team to do that. We wait until the law has passed and, well, we do take peeks at it to make sure we can actually do what they think we can do. And then we redesign our forms to capture any changes of what's happened. But what we're going to talk about is what we are doing for this school year. When we're done today, my hope is that you can probably already answer some of these questions, but that you'll be able to better answer these 10 questions. Where do the school funds, public school funds, come from? How are they distributed and allocated to you? Each one of our charter schools in our school districts. We have about 192 school districts and charter schools right now. How is average daily attendance calculated? Yeah, we could probably just skip that one because you know the answers now. What is a support unit and how is it calculated? Dean covered that as well, and he gave away the secret of think of a support unit as generally a classroom of students. What is salary-based apportionment and how is it calculated? And this is so important because about 80 to 85% of the dollars you spend are going to be to pay somebody to administer, to teach, to be an aide, to be, do your books, to clean your floors. And that includes the benefits for them too. How much is a support unit worth? Well, based on what was appropriated, it's about $146,000, and we'll talk about that. What is a distribution factor and how is it calculated? When do you get your money? What's our schedule for sending you the funds? Another little secret is almost everything we do is driven by Idaho code or state board rule, which we also call IDAPA or administrative rule, which has the weighting of law. And so we'll be quoting a lot of code sections. And when we send you the money, the bulk of your money is determined by Idaho code. How is a school or districts or charter schools foundation payment calculated? And those are the big payments we send to you on specific dates throughout the year. And why do revenues per average daily attendance vary? And I'll tell you why right now, and I hope you'll notice as we go through, you're gonna be like, that's why. Your size. The funding formula recognizes economies of scale. West Data is going to be able to fill a classroom of first graders. What about Riggins? And they have 12 third graders and 14 fourth graders. They still have to have a teacher for that. So the smaller you are, the smaller your divisor that Dean talked about earlier. And so we'll look at that a little bit. Who do you teach? Alternative students, people look at all the money. It only takes 12 students in attendance to get the funding. But you have to remember, they're very expensive students to educate. They are not succeeding in a normal, traditional classroom. They need extra services to succeed. And so you're going to have the added costs. So who you hire is the last one. So I'm not sure, I had to step out. I don't know if I noticed on Alex as if you covered how the administrative index is calculated.
Mm-hmm.
So the administrator you hire, where do they fall on that index? What's their education? What's their years of experience? The greater of the two, the higher the funding will be for your administrator. And where are your instructional and people service staff placed on the career ladder? All of that determines your funding. You could have two schools, 200 students and 200 students, and their funding per student would be very, very different. But that's not how we determine the money we send to them. Because now it's based on who you hire, who you teach, et cetera. We go through all these calculations. But at the end of the day, when we say we paid this school X amount and that school X amount, somebody takes their attendance or their enrollment, divides it into that and says, why did you send them this much and me only this much? And then we can dive into the funding formula and explain why. And then please ask questions as we go. Now, this next slide talks about where does the money come from that we send to you? And the bulk of the dollars are coming from our pockets. Every time we go to the grocery store, go to Costco, and we pay our sales tax, that's that red piece of the pie there. About 36.5% of the general funds are from sales tax. And then as you work and you have Idaho taxes withheld, and then you true that up with your tax return, the other largest bucket, the 43.7%, is from individual income tax. And that's coming from us. Overall, for this current school year, fiscal year 25, and a fiscal year is July 1 to June 30, JFAC set an estimated revenue projection of $5.8 billion. And as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, we'll start hearing a lot more about if we're going to achieve that target. We want that to be achievable because if the money doesn't materialize, then we have that ugly H word, which is holdbacks. And they usually don't tell us about those until maybe March or April or May. And guess what? Most of your school year is gone, past. And then we're going to say, oh, they reduced our funding. I'm sorry, we're going to send you less money. It's a really tough situation. We've only had a couple of periods where that's happened. And I've heard nothing for this year. I do not expect it to happen. This next slide shows how the general fund revenues were appropriated during the 2024 legislative session. JFAC, which is the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, here's budget requests from all the different state agencies, and the superintendent prepares and submits, well, okay, we all prepare. She submits the public schools budget request for the next year. And then, as you can imagine, those budget requests far exceed the revenues that are available. And so their job, and they're working on that now, is to determine how that pie is going to be divvied up. Well, for fiscal year 2025, you can see that public schools got about $2.6 billion, almost $2.7 billion, about 50% of the dollars that were available for the general fund. You can see that colleges and universities, the light blue piece of pie, they got $365 million. And then other education, the maroonish color, got $306 million. And when you add those up, 3.3 billion of the 5.3 billion that was appropriated is going to some type of education. $6 of every $10 appropriated. Now, we don't answer the question of, is it enough? That is not what we get to decide. So this next slide, same as the first pie chart, we looked at it, but in a bar chart format. And you can see the percentage of individual income taxes over the last 10 years or so, and sales taxes. I do not know why fiscal year 2024 dropped. I've asked legislative services, they're going to research it, meaning one session is done. They will look into it for me. I have to wonder if it was that one-time rebate check we got in the mail, if that caused the revenues to drop. That's just my speculation, but you can see that for fiscal year 25, 80% of the funds came from individual income tax and sales tax. So when I hear that they're lowering the income tax rate, as a taxpayer, I'm really excited. As the person sitting in school finance, it worries me that the available funds are going to go down. And so there'll be less to distribute. And when we are getting about 50% of the funds, I can worry about a lot of things, and that is one of them. I haven't heard anything on sales taxes being reduced, so that may be fairly steady. This next slide shows a 10-year history of appropriations on a percentage basis. And so you can see that public schools typically receive, 48 to 50-ish% of the revenues that are available. So now you know where the money comes from. It comes from the taxpayers of Idaho. We're going to move on to administrative rule, and it's set by the State Board of Education and governs days in session and the calculation of average daily attendance that I teachers in the teaching process, going back to the PE question earlier, for not less than 4 hours or its equivalent of instruction per day. Lunch periods, breaks, passing time, etc., are not to be counted as part of that 4 hours. For kindergartners, each session will be at least 2.5 hours per day. And that's because Idaho funds half-day kindergarten. Last year, or several years ago, there was a significant increase in the amount of literacy funds that were distributed to schools. It went from 27-ish million to about $72 million as a special distribution. And I would have to say the majority of Idaho schools use that money to offer full-day kindergarten. That amount hasn't changed over the last several years. The career ladder cell amounts have increased, and so we're starting to see more schools ratchet back, and maybe they're only offering full-day kindergarten to select students. So that's how so many of our schools are offering full-day kindergarten, is they're using other funding sources. It goes on to say that a half day in session occurs when the students in grades 1 through 12 are under the guidance and direction of teachers in the teaching process for a minimum of 2.5 hours. So you have a 5.5 hour school day. A student gets pulled out to go to the orthodontist or the doctors, and they're only there 3.5 hours. You will get a 0.5 weighting for that student that day. If they had left it 4 hours or 4 hours and 1 minute, you would have gotten a 1 weighting. Something to keep in mind, if you're going to have a half day of school and you're expecting good attendance, have a 4-hour day. If you think all the parents are going to pull their kids out, get a jump start on the holiday weekend, then have it be less than 4 hours, because that weighting of a poor day of attendance at a full day is a greater weighting than a full half day of attendance with a half day with poor attendance. I hope that made sense. So things to think about as you set your calendars. For a lot of years, my kids went to West Ada. Friday before Labor Day weekend was a staff development day. And it was because parents were pulling their kids out of school. And then the teachers, the demand from the teachers and the parents for us to start, school in August but be done by Memorial Day made it so they couldn't do that anymore. So they no longer do that. But that's why we say maybe look at the calendars of your surrounding schools when you submit, when you're preparing your calendar for your school. Kindergartners are either there in school 2.5 hours or they're not. So it doesn't matter if they're there 2.5 hours or 6 hours. They get the weighting that they get. If they're only there 2 hours, they don't meet the 2.5 hour minimum, and so they would not be included. And it's because of this, what Dean covered earlier, what we're covering here, that you can offer a 4-day week. Because if you have 100 students in attendance every day and you're a 5-day week, we have 100 Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 500. You have 5 days in session. You divide that into the 500. You have 100 average daily attendance for that week. If you're a 4-day school, you have 4 days at 100 each. So you have 400 aggregate attendance divided by 4 days in session gives you 100 average daily attendance. So as long as you're meeting the minimum instructional hours, we don't care if you do a 4-day or a 5-day. We probably have about 100 schools right now that are of our 192 that are offering a 4-day school week. And I have yet to see a school go to a 4-day week and go back to a 5-day week. Just food for thought. This next slide.
Julie,
Who said that?
kindergarten students are only counted 0.5 if they're there 2.5 hours. They're not counted as one. It is for funding purposes.
They're for funding purposes, they have to be counted as one, but we're going to apply a divisor of 40. And so where the next highest divisor is 23 for grades 4, 5, and 6. So you're going to have 20 students in the morning, you're going to have 20 students in the afternoon, and you're going to get funded one support unit. I have to look to the boss.
The divisor is what actually performs the half-day funding. Since the divisor is roughly, for kindergartners, 40 is roughly twice as big as the every other divisor. That's how the half-day funding gets that's the mechanism.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay, so this next slide is at the full-time equivalent enrollment. So for a few years during the pandemic, the state board created a temporary rule to allow average daily attendance to be based on full-time equivalent enrollment. We don't do that anymore. It's based on what we call seat time. But you still have to report full-time equivalent enrollment to the State Board of Education as part of your IC uploads. At this time, we are not using this data for anything, but you will have to report this information. I will say that one of the bills going through the legislature right now would use this data. So my guess is schools are going to pay a lot more attention to this data once, if that bill were to pass. And it uses their enrolled course minutes to determine if they are a 1 FTE on this. But you will be reporting that information as well. So now we're going to move from state board rule to Idaho code, and this is straight out of code. And think of this as a conversion table that converts your average daily attendance to support units. There's 5 categories. The first one is kindergarten, and you can see that the divisor is 40. If you have 41, we don't know why it's 41 and not 40, but if you have 41 or more students, you have a divisor of 40. The next category is elementary 1 through 6, and you can see the divisors range from 23 down to 12. And this is where your size matters. If you have more than 300 average daily attendance, you are going to use a divisor of 23 for grades 4, 5, and 6, and 20 for grades 1, 2, and 3. If all of your elementary K-6 combined is less than 300, then we'll use the appropriate divisors for that line item. So let's say you have 51 students in average daily attendance for midterm reporting period, or for that, sorry, for that period. Then we will apply, you can just slide across and say, oh, then we use a divisor of 13, and that works out to 3.92 support units. What if you grow by 1 student and now you have 52 students in average daily attendance? And as Dean mentioned, the larger the divisor, the smaller the result. Now you have a divisor of 15, and that's almost a half a support unit less because you grew by that 1 ADA, and you have 3.47 support units. And so if you look at those minimums on the far right, that will protect you from going down. And instead of receiving 3.47 support units, we're going to pull you up to 4 support units as the minimum. These minimums apply to school districts and charter schools for kindergarten and elementary. But I want you to make a note that if you, for secondary, the next category where the divisors range from 18.5 to 12, if you have less than 99, if you are a charter school and you have less than 99.99 in average daily attendance, those minimums do not apply, and we use a divisor of 12. And that is in the charter school law and 335207. And it literally says charter schools with less than 100 secondary ADA will use a divisor of 12.
So, pardon this question, because maybe somewhere in there you explained it and I just didn't grasp it. Where have the divisors, how did they come up with those divisors?
In 1994. A group of people, there had been multiple attempts to redo the funding formula, and they finally took some key stakeholders, put them in a room, and they came up with this funding formula that we have right now, as well as this divisor table. Very well thought out. Perhaps it should have been updated over the years, especially when you look at the staffing ratios, because what did we hardly have in 1994? We hardly had computers. And now look at the IT staff that we have to have, but you still have a 0.375 classified staff ratio. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So there's actually a lot of fear of opening this up because they're worried that perhaps it could be made worse. Maybe one day it will, but I am not on the political side of things, and I thank everybody for not making me be in there for that. Any other questions? Okay, so the 4th category is the exceptional category, and exceptional students means your special needs students. It's not based on reality. It's simply based on a percentage, and we'll talk about that more. It doesn't matter if you have no special ed kids or and we literally have schools that range from 0% special needs to 30+% special needs, but we're going to apply the same funding formula to everybody. That is one thing I would certainly change. And then the final category is for our alternative schools. It's for grades 6 through 12. And just a reminder that it is made up of at-risk students defined in Idaho code. And they do have the lowest divisor of 12. So this next slide shows a picture of what we just looked at. Think of each bar as a support unit. The red bar is for our kindergartners, where it takes 40 in attendance to generate a support unit. And based on the dollars appropriated, that value is $146,000. So you need 40 kinders to generate a support unit, and you need, in the yellow bar, 12 alternative students to generate $146,000. And then it's in between here. But this clearly shows how the smaller you are, the less support units or less students in attendance are needed to generate funding for your school. That's that. I call it the economies of scale. If anyone has a better term, please let me know what that is. This next slide shows the midterm support unit calculation. And as we calculate support units 2 times during the school year, we calculate the same 2 multiple times, but we take your average daily attendance from the first day of school through the first Friday in November, and that's your midterm reporting period. You're going to submit data to us in October, but it's not a complete term yet, but we're still going to eyeball your data, and Dean will reach out to say, hey, did you mean to exclude all your 6th graders? You know, we do a very high level review of your data, but really, it's on you to review your data. These are your students. You know them. You know, oh yeah, that was a day when everybody was sick, or you know your data much better than we do. We can only spot high level differences. And then we calculate it for what we call the best 28 weeks. First day of school through the last day of school. We list out all of your weeks, and then maybe you have 36 weeks. We rank them high to low. And we take the best 28 weeks, and then we convert that attendance to support units. Now, midterm reporting period. So you submit in October, you submit again in November. You have until early December to correct your data. And then you get your payment based on the data you gave us. And you're like, this doesn't look right. So then you do your deep dive into your reports. But that's February. Schools now are submitting their March uploads to us, and they can go back and correct their attendance data for that first reporting period. So when we do the February 15th payment, that's the first time we use current year data. When we do the May 15th payment, we rerun your midterm support units, the calculations, and pull in any corrections that you have. In July, that's the July 15th payment that we do to close out the school year. We rerun your midterm support units for that same period, first day of school through the first Friday in November. And that's the first time we rank your weeks, your best 28 weeks, and calculate support units. So please make sure you review your data. So this is Midvale. I thank them for volunteering. And I know you're a charter group. I purposely pick a school district to help point out some of the funding differences. And we already talked about one, and that's not being able to use the minimums for your secondary program if you're less than 100 average daily attendance. And then I'll point out 1 or 2 more here. So this shows their kindergarten. It shows that they had aggregate attendance of 286. Their ADA, average daily attendance, is 6.98. And we apply that divisor of 40. And you don't see anything there. And that is because they fell into the minimums. And there's actually a special code provision. I can't remember, Dean, you're just looking at me.
It's in the divisor table.
Okay, I can't remember, but if you're less than 10, 8. All right, that's what I was looking for. If you're less than 8 average daily attendance, your kinders are rolled into your elementary attendance. And so that's why this one looks a little bit different. But you can see their average daily attendance, and they have tracks here. And why is that? My guess is that for their elementary 1 through 6, they have a slightly different calendar. Maybe their grades 1 through 5 are in a building, and their 6th graders are with a middle school. And I don't know, my kids when my fifth grader would have a parent-teacher conference day, but my seventh grader was going to middle school. They weren't out of school, and you will negatively impact your attendance if one group of students in your 1 through 6 band is in school and another group is out. And so what you'll work with Roger and Amy, Dean, if you call Dean, he'll get you to the right people. And we break them out so that a day out for one group won't reduce the attendance, average daily attendance for another group. Because if you go back to that 100, all right, I can't do that kind of math in my head, but let's say you have 10 students and only 10 are in attendance that day because the other 90 are out for parent-teacher conferences, we're going to still include that 10. And you can see how that would give you a much worse average daily attendance for that week when only 10 of your students are there. So by having tracks, that will take care of that.
Can I say this?
Yes, please do.
So-
Save me.
So tracks are simply when you set up different calendars in your student information system, and let's say you need a sixth grade calendar because a separate sixth grade calendar because they attend slightly different days than the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth graders do. And so tracks are simply calendars that you've set up. And you may not need to set up calendars because maybe all of your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders always attend the exact same day. So you really only need one calendar. You don't need tracks. But a lot of places do need tracks. And this is just an example of what they did. So they have the track set up. And the tracks help, the separate calendars help maximize your average daily attendance. Yeah.
So all of our schools are in K-5 for elementary, and then we include sixth grade as secondary, but they're all in the same calendar as far as secondary and elementary, so we wouldn't have to create any tracks.
Right, if they have the same days.
They have the
you're right.
exact same
Exact same.
calendar.
Yeah, if they have the exact same days.
Your sixth graders will be combined. K, or 1 through 6 is combined for, even if you're in multiple buildings or, yeah. So, okay, so I want to point out, I don't know if you can kind of see in the middle, the 4.14 reduction there for elementary. This is what Dean and I were talking about earlier about the shift down for your exceptional education. Per state board rule, we are to shift 6% of your elementary enrollment and 5.5% of your secondary enrollment down to the exceptional category. And so you can see the 4.14 down below under exceptional education and the 3.58. And then we apply that exceptional education divisor to those students. It is optional on if we move secondary or not. And that's what Dean was referring to at the end of his presentation is we're going to run it both ways and give you the benefit of the higher number. When you go through all the calculations, you can also see their alternative program. They have total support units of 13.56. And then you see a protected support unit adjustment of -4%. That was a grim year. That was the year we went from enrollment-based attendance back to seat time. It was a horrid year for our schools for funding purposes. And you can see the adjusted support units of 12.99. This is the 12.99 we're going to see on the salary apportionment worksheet. You will not have an adjustment for protection for charter schools. It is not state funded protection. The school districts combine together and everyone chips in to cover the cost of protection. But I just wanted to point that out to you that was NA for charter schools. This next report shows best 28 weeks. And you can see both reports were run in July. And that's because we're using your most recent upload to do that. But this just shows that, you know what, their attendance is actually a little bit higher for when we looked at their best 28 weeks. So their support units are actually 13.14. And if it had been 12.8, I wouldn't have been surprised. They're typically close. Midterm support units and best 28 week support units, but they're not the same because we're looking at different weeks. If you're a school that's growing, then your best 28 weeks will be higher. If you're a school that maybe, first 10 to 12 weeks were your best weeks, and then students stopped coming, they got tired, they transferred out, then your best 28 weeks support units will be a little bit lower. And this 13.14 is what we will use to allocate your discretionary funding to you. I'm only going to cover this very quickly on the staffing piece, but who you hire also impacts your funding based on, for your administrators, based on their education and their experience. They're going to be placed on this index here, and that will drive your funding for your administrators. Your career ladder, the career ladder is used for your instructional and pupil service staff, and that is, they're placed there based on Idaho code, and it gets pretty technical. And just like I divert attendance questions to Dean, all staffing questions go to Alex because she just has it nailed down on helping you. But it depends on their performance, on where they fall on the career ladder, and first year teachers are going to be on the residency. My daughter's doing a residency, so it's just odd to keep saying residency for teachers, but she's on the residency run as well. Your first year, you're an R1, and then R2 and R3, but to move on to a professional and advanced professional, you have to get certain endorsements and have certain performance criteria. So on this slide, you can see the 12.99 support units that we calculated for Midvale. And just like attendance, we're rerunning the salary apportionment worksheet, even though it's based on midterm, we rerun it for the May and the July payments based on the most current midterm support units that we have. And you can see the staff allowance ratios in column A that Alex talked about, the 0.075 for administrators, instructional and pupil service combined equal 1.1, et cetera. And then you just kind of flow across, and I'll make a note that the base salary for administrators and for our classified non-certified staff, that is set each year by in the public schools appropriation. And so we don't know what it's going to be for next year. And that's what we will, when you go to access the forms for budgeting for next year, all that information will be pre-populated. But because of that, the legislature adjourns, we still have to wait for the governor to sign the bills before we can actually prepare some of our forms. They tend to hold public school bills hostage in the legislature to get other bills passed. That's just a layperson's observation, not a criticism. And so within a couple of weeks of the legislature adjourning, we typically have our budget forms available. But in the bottom right corner, you can see that Midvale generated $1.2 million in salary apportionment funding, and the benefit apportionment was $238,756. And a reminder that benefit apportionment is only PERSI, Public Employee Retirement System of Idaho, and FICA. It is not for, medical benefits, et cetera. And so we have the percentage for our administrative and our pupil service instructional staff is about 21%. And for most of our classified staff, it's 19.61% for this year. And so we'll update the forms to reflect that, any changes in the percentage. We had the same percentage for years, and then PERSI increased their rates the last couple of years. On the next slide, this is how we determine an estimated statewide average value of what a support unit is worth. And this shows how we calculate the $146,005. What we do is we apply the ratios for our staffing that are set in Idaho code. So we have a 1.1 combined amount for instructional and pupil service staff. We multiply that by what we think the statewide average salary will be, $58,317. And that generates the $64,149 for salary apportionment for that group of staff. For administrative staff, you get about 1/13 of an administrator for each support unit. And that's why at our smaller schools, administrators wear so many hats. They're the federal program director. They're also the transportation supervisor, et cetera. So we take the estimated average index for our administrators and we multiply that by the base salary to come up with $81,738. We then say, all right, what's that times 0.075 ratio? That generates $6,130 for the statewide average support unit value. For classified staff, 3/8 is what you will receive for your ratio. So 8 support units generates 3 bodies. It's not very much when you're looking at business manager, HR director, IT staff, custodians, etc. So we take that 0.375, multiply that by the base salary set in code, $39,996, and that generates $14,987. In that far right column, we apply the benefit apportionment rates, the 21.13 for the first 2, and then the 19.61% for classified staff. And that generates $17,117 combined. So altogether, the staffing portion of the estimated support unit value is $102,383. We then add to that the distribution factor that is set by the legislature when they set the public schools bills. And that is $43,622 per support unit. You combine all of those, and that's how we get to the $146,000. If you were to say, all right, what if we have only served kinders? That would work out roughly to $3,650. If you, and I know I keep using the 2 extremes, if you're an alternative school with 12 students, that works out to about $12,000 per student. And then all the others fall in between that. We will never, ever tell you to budget, well, currently, tell you to budget X amount per student. If you call and say, I need to know an amount per student, we're going to say, no, you have to go to Dean's support unit worksheets, work through those, take that result, apply it to the salary apportionment worksheets that Alex oversees, and work through the process. I'm just going to encourage you to trust the budgeting process. It's worked for a lot of our schools, and you just have to be very reasonable, maybe conservative in your estimates on that. So when we say on the 146,000, when we look at the salary and benefit apportionment, that's about 70% of your funding. It's based on who's showing up that first midterm reporting period. The other 30% is based on your best 28 weeks units, which are generated throughout the year. This next slide is a summary of the fiscal year 2025 public school appropriation. And you're going to notice that the amount is slightly different than that first or second pie chart I showed you. And that's because I've excluded the $15-ish million that was appropriated for the Idaho Educational Services for the deaf and blind in Gooding. They just get their money off the top of our appropriation, of the appropriation. So when you look at the first green column, that shows the appropriation amounts for fiscal year 2025. And you'll see that the general fund revenues, about $2.6 billion. Other state revenues were $283.8 million. And then my big disclaimer, the $351.1 million in federal funds, we have nothing to do with in school finance. We oversee the state and what we call the dedicated funds, but we do not, that's Josh's group, Linda's group, China's group. We don't deal with the federal funds at all in school finance. But when you combine all of those amounts, it's about $3.27 billion. And then you drop down to section 2 that says statutory expenditure. Statutory meaning Idaho code, meaning we can point to an Idaho code section that says you will distribute money for salary apportionment. You will distribute $400 per adjusted attendance for charter school facilities. And altogether, that's the bulk of the money. That's $2.14 billion. And then when you drop down to section 3, it says non-statutory expenditures, meaning there's intent language in the appropriation bill that says you shall distribute $36.5 million for technology. You shall distribute, $15 million for professional development, but actually some of that is kept at the department. So that is about $75.6 million. So when you look at section 2 and section 3, which we also include federal expenditures there in section 4, that accounts for about 2.56 billion of the 3.2 billion that was appropriated. The difference is what you see on line 6 as net state funding, and that's about 704 million, well, it is $704,671,100. We divide the estimated support units. Remember, we're going to prepare in August our budget requests for fiscal year 27. We're going to jump over the top of 26 and say, oh, this is what all the numbers are going to be. So it's just an estimate. Our goal is to be close, but we don't know what's going to happen. So that 704 million is divided by the estimated support units of $16,154. And that's how we get to the $43,622 for the distribution factor. That's how it's calculated. Thankfully, we have a public education stabilization fund that's available to us because, we do a pretty darn good job. But even if we get within 1 or 2% of what we're going to need for salary apportionment, which I think is really, really good, that's still a huge amount of a difference when you're looking at it from a taxpayer point of view. So what if we need more money for transportation and more money from salary apportionment than what was appropriated? Well, that would reduce the amount of discretionary funds available at the bottom. But we can pull money out of the stabilization fund to fund those negative variances. So that it holds the distribution factor steady. We did not have that ability for a lot of years. And it's really hard to tell schools on July 15th after the fiscal year has already ended, numbers came in so much higher, we're only going to send you $35,000 per support unit. Sorry. We've had to do that before. And so that's why I really appreciate our stabilization fund. So that's our appropriation. What I want to show you next is when do we get you the money? When do we send you the money? Driven by Idaho code. And you can see that the bulk of the money, the $2.5 billion is distributed to you throughout the year in what we call our foundation payments. That's when we send you salary and benefit apportionment, your estimated discretionary money, transportation, a few other line items we'll look at in a minute. So we're going to send you about 50% of your funds on August 15th, about 20% on November 15th and on February 15th, about 10% on May 15th, and 1 to 3-ish% on July 15th. That gives you the money to operate until you receive the next payment. But we don't have current year data when we send you money on August 15th. And that's why we use that estimating M&O worksheet that Carol and Ashley talked about earlier to estimate your funding for the year. When we get to February, we're going to calculate all of your amounts. And we're going to say, all right, you should be at roughly 88% of your funds for the year. How much have you already gotten in your August and your November payments, and pay you the difference? We're going to do the same. And that's why we call that our true-up payment, because the first 2 payments are estimates. Now, all right, we may peek at your October upload to make sure what we've been paying you is reasonable, so that we don't get into an overpayment situation. We work really, really hard to avoid that. The special distributions, which are about $262-ish million, those go to you throughout the year as we have data available to you. Like literacy is a good example. Literacy, half of that money, $36 million, is based on prior year testing. So we can send that money to you as soon as our assessment area gives us that data. So it goes out September, October. The other $36 million is based on enrollment. First Friday in November. We get that information in December, and our first priority is, of course, calculating support units so Alex can start on the salary apportionment for the February payment, And then Dean focuses on enrollment. And we send you 80% of that money in December, January. We do not send out a full distribution because why? And I bet you know the answer to this is because you could submit corrections to us in March. So we're going to give you one more chance to get that data as accurate as possible. And then after we have your any corrections in March, we're going to recalculate what this fixed sum distribution is for each school. Look at what we've already paid you and pay you the difference. And so you're going to see a lot of payments that are based on current year data that we send them out at 70 or 80%. And that's because we don't want to wait until April to send you this money. We want in January, February, early March, we want to send you the bulk of the money and then true it up later. So this next slide is an example of what the foundation program calculation worksheet looks like. And we produce this worksheet. This is the July worksheet for Midvale. And we produce this worksheet for the February, the May, and the July payments. For the August and the November, that are simply a pro rata of what you received in the prior year, unless you're new. And then we use your M&O worksheet to allocate you the funds. We just send you an Excel spreadsheet. And every time we make a payment in school finance, you'll get an email from me. So emails are good, phone calls are bad. Emails, and there'll be like a worksheet telling you to that the payment's being made, so you can watch for those funds to come in. How you get the money is up to you. And Rachel, I'm sure, covers that. You know, for the foundation payments, the majority of our schools have it deposited to what's called an LGIP, Local Government Investment Pool, I think is the name of it, account at the state treasurer's office. Others have it wired to their bank account. You tell us, and we have, I think, one that gets a check. That's their choice. For our special distributions, I'm not sure that we offer the LGIP option, and instead it's either, most schools get it through a wire transfer to the account that they tell us. But you tell us how you receive the money. We can tell you what you're going to receive. But all right, so this is an example of the July worksheet for Midvale. You can see that the 13.14 has been placed in there for their support units. For the February and the May payment, we used 12.99 because we didn't have their best 28-week support units. So we used the midterm as the placeholder. All right, no yawning. I'm teasing. No, I tell my own team, if your eyeballs get heavy, stand up, walk around. It's okay. What if their support units had dropped down to 12 for best 28 weeks, and we've been paying them 12.99? They're at risk of having been overpaid a little. And that's why I kind of made the July payment a little bit bigger, because after you have one July payment where 18 schools have been overpaid, you start holding back a little bit more money from the February and the May payments to try to avoid that. If it's a small amount, we'll just adjust your August payment for that. You don't have to cut us a check for that, but again, that's the phone call you don't want. So, all right, support units on line one, we literally multiply that by the fiscal year 24 distribution factor of 41,394 to generate the 543,000. The salary and benefit apportionment were based on 12.99 support units and came from the salary apportionment worksheet we looked at earlier. We have maybe 5 school districts that have border contracts, NA for charter schools. Andrew talked about line 6. I'm sure he at least mentioned it a little bit. You may not have anything on line 6. And I used to think, oh, that's too bad. And then I figured out that might be good that you don't get anything on line 6, because those are, sounds just awful, but they've been the groups of students we're funding on line 6 have been identified as needing extra resources. So that's his I'm not the tactful person in the room. The line 7 is transportation. We literally get an Excel spreadsheet from our transportation unit saying how much to pay each school. We don't answer those questions. We send them to the transportation team. Adjustments. You make a correction. Maybe your best 28-week support units attendance was wrong. You can work with Dean and submit a correction, we will go back and recalculate what your discretionary funding should have been and make an adjustment on the next year's payment. We can look back at the prior 3 years to make corrections. So something to keep in mind. Then line 9 is lines 1 through 8 or 2 through 8 combined. That's the $2,087,000. And you can see that in August, we paid them just over $1 million. And then in November, February, and May, you can see the amounts that we paid them. So prior to the July 15th payment, we paid them $2,018,000. We look at what the difference is, and that's the $69,437 that we paid them on July 15th. When you get the payment email from me, you will know that all the documents have been posted on the secure site. And that's something that once you are in operation, July 1 or after, the administrator of the school can request from Amber or Ashley a password for that secure site because it's chock full of what we call PII, personally identifiable information. We will only give it to the charter school administrator. A very wise charter school administrator will immediately share it with their trusted staff that's going to be reviewing those reports. So maybe if you have an IC person, but probably for sure your business manager, and they can do the deep dive then into reviewing that. But if your business manager calls us and says, oh, my superintendent or administrator's out for 2 weeks, I need to review her, we will not give them the password. So maybe it's better to set it up a little bit earlier in the year. You won't really need it February 15th, but sometimes we do some special distributions that might have some PII. Once you've been in operation for a year, we send out remediation money right now based on testing scores. And so we post that to the secure site. We won't send that document out through email because some schools will have less than 5 students. That one goes out earlier in the year, but for your first year, there might not be a lot of need until February, but still a good thing to have. On line 18, you see all the different dollars that we've paid throughout the year for special distributions. They are not part of your foundation payments. They are separate payments that we make to you. And it's pretty heavily weighted towards the end of the school year, for sure the last half of the school year. And I want to draw everyone's attention down to the unemployment insurance. Once you become a charter school in effect, you're opening that school year for students, the department will pay your unemployment premiums. You may already have staff on board, so you set up an account prior to operating, and you're paying into it, and then you forget to switch it over. The Department of Labor is very cranky about giving you a refund and then billing us for any premiums after July 1. They'll do 1 premium reimbursement a month is what we were able to negotiate with them. And when you have 6 new charter schools opening, it may take you 6 months if all 6 of them forgot. So just make sure that you reach out to the Department of Labor when you are effectively open. And they'll reach out to us and we'll confirm your information. So big plug for unemployment. We're very happy to pay that on your behalf. Charter school advance payment. Idaho code allows new charter schools to request an advance of their funds up to 25%, and we'll send it to you July 31st, meaning I'm going to probably send it to account July 31st, and you'll get your funds August 1st, August 2nd. We are then going to ratchet down, Dean, if you'll go to the next slide, your next 2 payments so that on November 15th, you and a charter school that didn't request an advance and a school district are all at roughly 70%. And you can see that here. What the advance does is it just gets you some of your funds earlier. You have to, per code, request that by no later than June 1st. I will send a reminder. I will ask Rachel for email addresses for all the schools opening around May 15th and send an email out. If it bounces back or maybe you don't read your emails and you send it to me June 2nd or later. By law, I cannot do that. But you can probably, I'm not going to speculate, but remember, you will get 50% of your funds 2 weeks later on August 15th. Instructional hours, Amber did a great job covering that. I'm sure Andrew covered that. The annual audit required annually, did he cover that? Even if you don't have students, if you spent more than $250,000, you have to have an audit that year. Budgeting information, Ashley and Carol did a great job on that. Data acquisition calendar. This is a really cool document that we have at the department, and it's supposed to be a one-stop shop of all the reports due to the department. And we've even snuck in some of the state board reports, like the financial transparency reports that you have to submit to them that then get passed on to the state controllers. It's updated for the 26 school year, hopefully early July. But you have several due dates before July 1, your year of operation. We just talked about the charter school advance request. If you want that, that's due June 1st. If you want an advance on your transportation funding, that's due to our transportation team June 1st. On June 15th, you have to submit an application for your IDEA Part B and preschool funds. I don't know that you'll have a preschool, but your IDEA general funds, not general, federal funds, you have to request that. So not a bad time to start looking at that, getting an idea. If a report comes due that isn't on there, if you let us know, we'll work with the person that coordinates it and try to work to get that report added. The charter school facilities funding, I'm sure that Andrew covered that thoroughly. My parting shot to you, I believe, things that I would really recommend based on my 27 years of being here is hire a good business manager. I've watched school after school rely on a parent who thought it could be done in an hour or two a week. It can't be done. I don't understand the trickle down effect, but it seems to end at your business manager's desk. All the odd reports that are due seem to get passed on to them. It's a lot. Maybe you can share a business manager. I've seen that work very successfully. Like the business manager, Bliss School District and Glens Ferry School District share a business manager. We have multiple charter schools that have business managers. I know some of you will probably use Bloom, and wow, you're lucky there. Gem Prep, who's Gem Prep? You guys are lucky because they have like a central office with Brian and Lori and just phenomenal people in there. But network, for your school, network to find out what school software should we use. You can get a deluxe version that will bankrupt you, and you can get a very basic version that doesn't have all the bells and whistles that will get the job done. And it's very, very inexpensive. So talk to schools of similar size and find out what software they're using for their accounting. Find out who their auditor is. Make sure that they can meet the timelines, because if you don't submit your first audit, which won't be due until the first year you end with students, if we don't have it in our hands by November 10th, we're going to hold your November 15th payment. We don't want to do that. We want you to submit your audit. So make sure that the auditor is available all year long for questions and that they will do a timely audit. And then network. We just presented all day yesterday at what we call IASBO, Idaho Association of School Business Officials. Phenomenal group of business managers. There's charter school and school district people there. First day that they had was Wednesday. It was like 7 hours of almost one-on-one. It was at one table with one experienced business manager telling them everything they needed to know about GRA drawdowns. Another table was covering technology. Another table was covering, the best $150 you can spend is for your business manager and maybe even your administrator to attend. I do not get a commission for this, but I would just highly encourage. They are my favorite group of people. They are the most amazing school people out there. The post-legislative workshops. Do you have that agenda yet? We don't. You know what? I'll send it to you. If you are opening this year, you're not on our superintendent's list. And that's who, when I say supers, I mean supers and charter administrators. You're not going to get the email. But what they're going to do is go talk to you all day long about the laws that are going to impact you next year. So you need to attend if you're open. Now, if you're not opening till the next year, you can see if you can go, if you want to just kind of hear. Sometimes space is an issue, but most of them are being held at universities, and my guess is there'll be space available. But they don't even copy us when they send that email out. They just say if we're going or not. And maybe Rachel can make a note to talk to Taylor about getting a copy of that email so she can forward it to you. In the past, we would take all afternoon to go over budgeting. And it was a long afternoon. You thought this morning was long. Oh my gosh, that's a long afternoon. Because they're not going to do the post-legislative tour workshops around the state until May, you can't wait that long for your budgeting information. So we are going to do a webinar earlier in the year. And that would also, I'll know when that is because I'll be at it. I'll try to get that to Rachel when I know when it will be, which we won't know when it will be until it's adjourned. And then they're going to say, you have 2 weeks to complete everything. And then I'll be like, I don't know. And then we'll do it because that's what we do. So make sure you attend if you're opening. I would seriously consider attending if you're opening the following year. And then the other thing, I think I talked about it. Did I talk about our monthly webinars that we do each month? So those are really cool. All right. I think they're really cool. All right.
Could I mention also, did Todd King or Amy Sigler present today from IC? Yeah, so they have started the year IC at the 5 or 6 different regions throughout the state. Those are held at the end of August or beginning of September. Those are also really important for at least one representative of your team to attend to get the latest, IC submission updates. And then Alex and I also present there, and it's going to be more detailed than today, if that's possible. But yeah, it is possible. Anyway, a lot of good information on those.
Yeah, it's really good.
IC boot camp.
And free to attend. Post-ledge and the webinars and that IC tour are all free to attend, other than a day out of the office, which I know is hard. These are our contacts. Please call us with questions. We want you to succeed, and sometimes just a little misunderstanding can have a pretty big impact on your funding. Is there a next slide, Dean? Yes. Nope. All right. I will send you the agenda, and then maybe you can slap it up there. So for the post-ledge tour, for the Boise area, it's May 5th. For the Twin Falls area, it's May 9th. Pocatello, would you go to the Pocatello or the Boise one? Pocatello is May 8th. Idaho Falls is May 7th. There you go. You can go to either one. Registration is required and you get lunch from it. Did we have a North Idaho? Yep. North Idaho? May 1st is Moscow, May 2nd is Coeur d'Alene. So that is all I have, you guys. What questions do you have?
I don't have any questions. So we'll call you, you don't call us.
That is fair. Yeah. I do get a complex around payment seasons with people not wanting